Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the late start. Technical gremlins have crept into the system and we keep the program going as it is a jam-packed event. And before we got into the technical gremlins that crept into our system, we had Ralph Fletcher, the CEO of Topco Media, officially kickstarting us out into the event. And now, no stranger to the Future of HR Summit stage. With our opening keynote address, please welcome Mark Privet. He is the General Manager of Career 24 and Simplify HR at Media 24. But before we bring him in, we are going to go back to Ralph, and he's going to let us know on why we are here today, as well as the future of HR. How many delegates from across how many countries? Ralph, take it away.
Wow! Welcome to the Future of HR, and incredibly welcome to Simplify HR. So I'm sitting here in our offices in beautiful Cape Town, and I'd love to ask the people in Cape Town, KZN, Joburg, Inland and the closer side of the audience to please show their appreciation in a huge round of applause for our host partner, Simplify HR. So please give your love in the chat, sharing where you're from, and thank you for that. Now, we also want to ask the international part of the audience to give a huge round of applause to our session partners, Old Mutual, Ngeni, Water, and Sage, by giving them love in the chat and sharing where you are from. So also, guys, thank you so much for that. So it's been incredible that so many of you have joined us from all over the world. Welcome! So many of you are working remotely, some from offices and others in a hybrid way. For sure, the rules of work have changed. The requirements have changed, and now we are waiting for the mindsets to change. We have over 2,000 signed up, 2,500 signed up attendees at the Future HR from over 30 countries who are joining us on Hopin for the Future HR Summit over the next 2 days. And you're all going to meet so many incredible people, no doubt, who are sitting around you virtually right now are some brilliant entrepreneurs, executives, recruiters from all corners of the planet. And networking lies at the heart of Topco. The Future of HR is all about networking. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to virtually stand up and introduce yourself to people around you. Just connect with 3 people. So connect on the People tab and use the search functionality by name, company, or designation to connect with 3 people. So well done for that. So in the next 2 days, we will be having time to use the networking feature, the Connecting Networking tool. It's our version of speed dating. So I challenge all of you to do that at least 10 networking sessions a day. So now, that'll be lots more time for chatting, networking and meeting. You know that using the networking hop-in tool feature, you can do what you've just done to absolutely anyone at the Future of HR Summit. You can say hello to Vern Harnish, to Arnie Mulholland, or the #1 top employer, Unilever's Lisa Andrews. It's the most powerful tool we have all got at the Future of HR. My one tip is to connect your profile with links to LinkedIn. This will help you find friends and colleagues at Future HR so much. So get your phones out, share your digital badge. I'm a delegate. Right now, let the world know where you are by sharing on your favorite social media platform, whether it's LinkedIn, maybe it's Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, that you're at the Future of HR. It will help friends and even people you might know who are here to find you. So, the Future HR started as a simple idea in December of 2013 with the aim to connect HR leaders and top employer community with both industries new and old, to inspire them to become great places to work with a new mindset of growth, trust and action. So, less than 100 people came to that first Future of HR Summit. The numbers in 2019, before we went virtual, was just under 400, and in 2 years we've grown that to 2,500 of Africa's leading companies here. The Future of HR has actually become the largest gathering of HR professionals, startups and top employers in Africa. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to give a very huge group of people a round of applause to my special Topco employees and the Simplify team who've worked year-round on the Future of HR Summit. To the well over 20 contractors and temporary staff, sponsors and partners, a huge, huge round of applause. So thank you. So why are we all here at the Future of HR Summit? Well, I think we're at an inflection point that comes around not once in a lifetime, but in several lifetimes. It's an opportunity to rewrite and reimagine the future of work. We're turning everything we know upside down, everything we thought certain, work, society, politics, life on Earth itself. And it's really exciting the impact that employees are making in society and the world. And it's just beginning. There is so much happening in the world. But obviously there's challenges. There's things like COVID and mental health that is deeply, deeply concerning. And on centre stage today and over the coming days, HR leaders and others will talk about the priorities of work-life balance. Where do we work? Remotely, hybrid, virtually? When do we work? How important is flexibility and even how we work? Are the old rules, meetings? Who loves a meeting here? How do we engage? How do we become productive? They'll also be talking about its shortcomings. So more than 50 speakers from around the world are going to take you into a deep dive across 10 specific sessions spread across this huge Future of HR Summit. Now at Topco, we like surprises. And our first surprise is we've got a special surprise in the launch of the Future of HR publication. And our second surprise is that this afternoon you're all invited to attend the Future of HR Awards. So, thank you and enjoy today and this afternoon. Enjoy.
Well, it does seem today is filled with many surprises. Definitely looking forward to the launch of the Future of HR publication. And much more that we'll be looking forward to as well, as Ralph was asking all the right questions on work, on engagement, how we work, why we work, and of course, encouraging you to network across the platform. Do make sure that you also engage with us across our social media platforms, and we will make sure that we read out your tweets, all 2,000 of you from across the 30 countries. And of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors, Simplify HR, Umgeni Water, Remote, Sage and Old Mutual. We also extend our gratitude to our strategic partners. Now, even though we'll be hearing from over 50 local and international speakers, we encourage you to also join in on the conversation, and we'd love to hear from you. So make sure you get in touch with us in the chat function of the Hopin platform, as well as our universal hashtags, the 3 that we have over the next 2 days. It's hashtag FOHR, hashtag Future of HR, and hashtag HR Heroes. There are also mandatory bags valued at 1,400 Rand, a couple's massage voucher at Relax Spa at the Marriott valued at 1,150, up for grabs for the most engaging tweets. We also encourage you to visit the Topco help desk for more information, and please make sure that you use some of our awesome virtual selfie booths taken over the next 2 days, and remember to post it across your social media. You can also stand a chance to win one of 500 Rand Take-A-Lot vouchers by simply filling in the On The Money register link that is provided by our team in that chat function. Winners will be announced tomorrow. So we want you to let us know your thoughts about our mega trends in HR that we'll be unloading and unpacking today, namely financial wellness, leadership, youth and skills development, and shaking up company culture. All this and more on the Future of HR Summit and Awards 2021. Now, we're going to introduce someone who is no stranger to the Future of HR Summit stage. Ladies and gentlemen, with our opening keynote address, please welcome Mark Privet, who is the General Manager of Careers 24 and Simply HR at Media 24.
On behalf of the Simplified.HR team, I'd like to offer a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Topco Media team for the amazing work that they've done in once again delivering a world-class and thought-provoking summit this year. If you look at the program, you'll see that it's packed with discussions around many of the issues and questions that we as HR professionals are asking on a daily basis. The caliber of speakers this year is world-class and promises not only to be thought-provoking, but practical too. I'm sure we will all find tangible value in the next few days that we can take back into our organizations. One of the themes of this year's summit is the changing workplace and how we need to adapt. The companies that have come out of the depths of the pandemic stronger are the ones who have been able to adapt the fastest. If I look at the Topco Media business as an example, it's a really good example of an organization that has managed not only to survive the pandemic, but really thrive, and has found innovative ways through digital adoption to bring us a world-class conference to a wider audience, and truly with the most impressive speaker lineup to date. It's really impressive what you can achieve when you shake off the notion of physical presence being a prerequisite for engagement. Letting go of the tried and tested and embracing the inevitable future has become a requirement in the world that is changing in front of us. Under the backdrop of the pandemic, it has never been as important as now to get together as an HR community, to work together, to find solutions for the problems that we are facing in our workplaces. Thanks once again to Rolf, Claire, and the Topco Media team, not only for putting together an amazing event this year, but also for allowing us to participate in it. We are extremely proud to be associated with which is considered to be one of the top human resources conferences globally. But before I start, I'd like to introduce myself and my organization. My name is Mark Privet, and I'm the General Manager of a company called Simplified.HR. For those of you who do not know us, we offer effective recruitment management solutions that help companies hire faster, more cost effectively, and offer better candidate experiences that ultimately deliver a better quality of hire. All of this while ensuring compliance with data privacy laws. Our ethos is simple. Recruitment should not be complicated. We also believe that effective recruitment builds stronger organizations, which in turn builds a stronger and better economy. Over the last 3 years, we have delivered over 50 million rands in direct savings to our customers. We've saved hundreds of thousands of hours in productivity, but most importantly, delivered fantastic candidate experiences while also delivering a better quality of hire. So if you're an organization who's looking at improving your recruitment process or looking at making savings in your recruitment costs, then I urge you to have a conversation with us. Well, that's enough of the sales pitch. Let's get on with the show. I'm going to be talking briefly on what we see as being some of the challenges facing people leadership at the moment. Some of these themes will be unpacked in detail over the next few days by speakers who are far more qualified than me, so I urge you to get involved. It's hard to believe that it's been 607 days since we went into the initial lockdown in South Africa. I laugh at the naivety I had, thinking that it would be a 21-day exercise and then done. From an organizational perspective, it's brought many challenges to all of us, from adapting to working from home, to the economic impact on our business, and to business continuity as a whole. One thing we cannot deny is that the pandemic has accelerated change, and we've all had to adapt to a new way of working. The fourth industrial revolution, which was only a concept, or should I say fear a few years ago at the same summit, has really come into full effect. On the other hand, the concept of work is also being challenged. The United States and parts of Europe are going through what they call the big resignation, brought in part by dissatisfaction with the type of unrewarding work that people are doing, but also dissatisfaction with the system that pays minimum wage for long hours and no upside. For many people, it's more expensive to go to work than to stay at home. And this to me speaks to a broken system. According to the Simplify.HR Job Markets Trend Report, a white paper we compile on a monthly basis that analyzes the available jobs online in South Africa, we see an interesting picture emerging. On a high level, the number of jobs available online has recovered to pre-pandemic levels, which on paper looks promising. However, if you dig a little bit deeper, it's quite clear that the demand for IT development, engineering, and technical skills far outweighs the supply. This is coupled with the drying up of jobs on the lower end of the spectrum, including in hospitality, in retail, and in administration jobs. And if you overlay this with the trend towards remote working, you'll find that many international companies are fishing in our talent pools for our scarce skills, paying in dollar or euro, pushing mass pressure on our salary budgets. But it's not all doom and gloom. The migration towards automation and new business models also brings new opportunities. Retail stores closing might lose frontline staff and store managers, but on the other end, there's an unprecedented demand for drivers, or within the logistics space, or within warehousing. Many banks are closing branches, but this needs to be supplemented by capability to build and manage digital solutions that replace those branches. I personally don't think that work is disappearing. It's the nature of work that is shifting and the skills required to do the work that is changing. And it is in this light that it's imperative that we retain our scarce skills to build our own economy, to grow the skills base through education, to meet the demand in a shifting skill requirement. And we need to find solutions to the general unemployment issue. Managing effective, profitable companies opens the door for employment growth, excuse me. So it's vitally important that we as HR leadership do our part in building engaged and productive teams, but also supporting growth through on-the-job learning and skill development programs. Having said that, the concept of work in itself is evolving. It's becoming more transactional. Personally, I think the concept of having permanently hired staff managed by the hours they work rather than the output will be challenged. I'll give an example of a boutique marketing company that I engage with, and there are many other examples like this. Prior to the pandemic, they had a staff complement of 10 people, a swanky office to impress their clients with, and the expenses that go with it. The pandemic forced the owner to relook at her business model, and while she had to let go of most of her team, she now uses the same team under retainer on a needs basis. Now, not only has this positively impacted her bottom line, but it's given her team the opportunity to grow their own businesses, pick up more work, earn more money, or lead more balanced lives if they so choose. This growing trend is giving flexibility to how one works. Globally, work flexibility is becoming more and more of a requirement in the workspace. Now, as HR leadership, we have to navigate this changing landscape, balancing the traditional needs of our organization with the changing needs and wants of our employees. Many of us who have had teams working from home on an extended basis, myself included, are grappling with the task of getting them back into the office. For many of our employees, the work-life balance that working from home brings outweighs many of the in-office perks that we offer. For many of us, my organization included, we are facing with the challenges of setting up blended working environments that still create the space for collaboration, for creativity, for teamwork, and for connectedness. This, compounded with the complexity of having to build safe workspaces or having to grapple with contentious issues like vaccination mandate policies, means that we, as HR professionals, really have our work cut out for us. It's never been more important than now to focus on productivity and employee engagement so that we can build healthy, profitable, and growing organizations. Practically, it's an almost impossible task to not only effectively hire in a remote or working environment, but also to keep the teams engaged, motivated, and connected. This requires a new set of skills, not only from the HR teams, but with the line managers too. So, for example, when hiring, I personally now put the ability to self-manage and self-motivate as one of my highest criteria, something that I wouldn't necessarily have given much consideration to prior to the pandemic. I also believe that this need for productivity management in a remote working environment will also drive some fantastic innovation in the HR technology space. I really look forward to seeing some of the tools that come out in the next few months that will help us solve some of these challenges that we're facing. But as much as technology can bridge some of the divide, it should not become a substitute for human connectedness. People want to be part of teams, not feel like cogs in an impersonal machine. So, in closing, I urge all of you to fully participate in the summit. One of the knock-on effects of the pandemic has been our inability to connect with our peers. So take this time to network, to learn from each other, or to take a breather to understand that your challenges are not yours alone. But most importantly, come out of the next few days energized with a few practical tools that you can take back with you. I really look forward to hearing from you next year on how you have managed to transform your organizations into healthier, more engaged and happier teams. Thank you and enjoy the summit.
Well, one thing that is certainly clear is that there are many questions that Mark has put to the table, including how do we challenge the great resignation, the nature of work that is changing much as the work is changing, and also looking at some of these broken systems that we'll be answering. Well, that is what over the next 2 days we'll be unpacking, looking at tools, looking at how management is responding and engaging to some of these questions, and of course the adaptation that definitely needs to take place. That was Mark Privet, the General Manager of Careers 24 and Simplify HR at Media 24. We now shift gears into human-centered digital transformation and looking at how do we unleash your organization's creative potential. Ushering us into this keynote address is Yunus Hairaj, the founder and CEO of Ikumo Inc., coming to you from Tokyo in Japan.
In 2001, a group of brilliant engineers, architects, and software developers got together to find an alternative to the existing processes they saw were complicated, slow, and unresponsive. They wrote the Agile Manifesto, and the first line was, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. 20 years later, the world has never been more complex, interconnected, volatile, and fast-paced. And this principle has never been more critical. In today's environment, efficiency and operation excellence are no longer a source of competitive advantage. The structure of most organizations does not reflect the world we live in. Most organizations are siloed while the world is interconnected. They're slow while the world goes faster by the minute. They're process-heavy and checklist-based while the world is complex. They're efficiency-oriented while the world demands effectiveness and adaptability. In today's environment, adaptability, agility, and resilience are the new competencies in order to survive and thrive. According to a 2016 survey by McKinsey, culture is the most significant self-reported barrier to digital effectiveness. And a PwC study found that 75% of change initiatives will fail, all due to a lack of a digital culture. This means you can have all the digital strategies, technologies, and skills to build digital effectiveness, but if the culture is not conducive to change and adaptability, if the organization and team structure do not reflect the interconnected, fast-paced world, culture will eventually eat strategy for breakfast, just like Peter Drucker, the management guru, had said. Organizations can no longer breed followers. They need to grow self-motivated, self-sufficient, and self-accountable individuals and leaders, and be able to attract and retain the right people. So, how do we transform our culture and organize our teams to build adaptability, agility, and resilience? How do we become the organization that attracts and retains the right people as we strive to build a digital organization? According to a 2016 survey by McKinsey, culture is the most significant self-reported barrier to digital effectiveness. And a PwC study found 75% of change initiatives will fail, all due to a lack of digital culture. This means you can have all the digital strategies, technologies, and skills to build digital effectiveness, but if the culture is not conducive to change and adaptability, if the organization and team structure do not reflect the interconnected, fast-paced world, culture will eventually eat strategy for breakfast, just like Peter Drucker, the management guru, said. Organizations can no longer breed followers. They need to grow self-motivated, self-sufficient, and self-accountable individuals and leaders, and be able to attract and retain the right people. But how do we transform our culture and organize our teams to build adaptability, agility, and organizational resilience? And how do we become the organization that attracts and retains the right people as we strive to build a digital organization? Before I talk about attributes that I think are vital to building a culture that is conducive to adaptability, agility, and resilience, let me share a story about Darren Hardy, the author of the New York best-selling book, The Compound Effect. That when he was ready to get married, he wrote more than 40 pages of a journal, front and back, describing his future wife in great detail. Her personality, her character, her key attributes, attitude, and philosophy about life, etc. Then he asked himself, what kind of a woman of life? Then he asked himself, what kind of a man would a woman like this be looking for? Who does he need to become to be attractive to a woman of the substance? Many organizations are guilty of writing only the first part through a job description without asking what kind of organization they need to become to attract and retain the right people. I know I was guilty of this, but I can attest that you can achieve wonders even with a small team with the right team structure. Our first cloud Center of Excellence team achieved enormous success because it was diverse enough to allow for creative thinking without the overhead of the lost in translation problem that we see sometimes in culturally diverse teams operating without a culture map. The team was autonomous, it understood the overall goals well and their impact on the overall mission. So now, how can we create teams like this to increase our odds for success and help transform our culture, be enabler instead of inhibitor? Every organization is different, but some key attributes can help organizations in their cultural transformation journey. In his best-selling book, Exponential Organizations, Salim Ismail talks about 11 attributes organizations need to have in order to survive and thrive in the information-based, interdependent, and complex environment. Inspired by Salim Ismail's work, and based on my experience, at least 5 attributes are needed to build agility, adaptability, and resilience. The first attribute, purpose. Purpose attracts talent, acts as anchor in the face of change and uncertainty. And the second attribute is autonomy. And it is about having small, self-organizing, cross-functional teams. The third attribute, team structure, beyond core team. In a fast-changing environment, it's hard to keep employees' skills and knowledge updated. Teams will be a mix of employees, freelancers from across the world, and digital partners working together to achieve shared goals. HR and hiring managers need to adjust to this reality and embrace this new world. Organizations need to have cultural maps to help managers and leaders of culturally diverse teams improve their effectiveness. The fourth attribute is social technologies. Social technologies can increase transparency and connectedness to accelerate decision-making, learning, and innovation. Workplace transformation to a digital workplace is critical. This includes cloud-based workspaces. This includes cloud-based workspaces, collaboration and communication tools like Notion, Slack, Zoom, etc., combined with tools to engage with the community like GitHub. The fifth attribute is people experience. Now, people's definition is, I'll talk a little bit or explore people experience a little bit in depth in the next slide. So people's definition in this interconnected world has a broader meaning. It is not limited to employee or core teams. It includes contractors, freelancers, digital partners, users, customers, alumni, community, etc., etc. Organizations need to design people experience from the ground up, from the interview process, hiring, onboarding, training, objective and key, results, setting, team interactions, working style, feedback, coaching, offboarding, alumni community building, etc. The message should be coherent at every touch point. Mission reiterated, core values reinforced, and principles woven into everyday interactions. At Aukomo, we have seen combinations of these attributes working with clients, and the results were impressive. Specifically, social technologies and autonomy have created the foundation for a continuous learning culture through information sharing and experimentation. Now, for these attributes to cement, we need culture custodians to ensure that the culture transformation journey is successful, and HR should be at the front seat. According to PwC's Human Resource Technology Survey in 2019, the top concerns of HR teams are attracting top talent and keeping them to increasing competition, developing everyone to reach their potential, improving employees' experience, primarily by automating tasks. This is all great, but not enough. HR, Chief Talent Officer, need to be part of the leadership team overseeing the entire organization. HR needs to champion the cultural transformation along with their C-level peers. From my experience, hiring and managing teams, my interaction with HR team were mostly limited to hiring, budget, and performance reviews. Had HR been involved early during planning and initiative prioritization, mistakes could have been avoided and risk mitigated. Example of some of the mistakes: the focus on the technical skills without thinking about the cultural aspects and the broader impact when hiring, building culturally diverse teams without a culture map, which results in miscommunication, sometimes even building the wrong things, burnout, etc., and building a better onboarding process, like rotations program for newcomers, and the list goes on. To sum up, HR's involvement and leadership are vital to successful. To sum up, HR's involvement and leadership are vital to a successful cultural transformation in order to build agility, adaptability, and resilience. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts and experience.
I think what is fundamentally clear is that not only does culture eat strategy for breakfast per Peter Drucker, but also it becomes so important to see how individuals and the interactions, that interconnectedness sits at the center before you could even bring in the processes and the tools to try and optimize and, of course, transform this cultural transformation. Obrigado, Yunus Haraj, the founder and CEO of Aukomo Inc., engaging on cultural transformation and how we can achieve that through social technologies as well as design thinking. Now, startups across the world have shown us how their character of agility has enabled them to scale and accelerate across borders and even faster as a result of the COVID-19 catalyst. What can corporate and HR leaders extrapolate from startup culture from these past 2 years? Well, our next keynote address, entitled Navigating the Next: 10 people and culture lessons from startups for corporate and HR leaders in the work of now and the world of now, by Deborah Harting, who is a Sparkfluencer, a leadership and culture change maker, as well as the author of Talent Liberation, as well as a keynote speaker, has all the answers for us to these questions on how we can engage better and learn better from startups and small businesses. leaders. Deborah, over to you.
You know, I remember the last time that I had the pleasure of being on stage at the Future of HR Summit and Awards, and that was back in 2019. And interestingly, this was pre-COVID, but myself and Colin J. Brown had to split our moderating and emceeing duties over the 2 days because both of us had flu. And it's amazing for me 2 years later that I'm back here and I'm getting to present to all of you amazing folks. And once again, I have the flu, except this time it is during a pandemic and I'm now doing it from my home in West Sussex in the UK. Thank you so much for joining me with this chat on Navigating the Next, which is really for me to share 10 people and culture lessons that I've seen from startups that we can start using in corporate business and HR sense to actually really embrace the now of work. So I think before the pandemic hit, those of us working in the future of workspace, people like calling us futurists, those of us working in the space saw so many changes coming through, but they weren't really mainstream. And what has happened with the pandemic is really that these seem to have been accelerated. One of the biggest things, obviously, that everyone will have seen is the whole work from anywhere scenario. And then, of course, there's the fear around what's called the Great Resignation, where we've got so many people globally just resigning from jobs because they're not happy, they don't like the work that they do, they don't like the people that they're working with, and they're saying, I've had enough. Which I know is leaving a lot of business and HR leaders somewhat perplexed. There's this big question mark over what is the future of work? What is our role as business leaders? Where does this leave HR? What do we do? Where do we even start? Now, for me, I can't 100% properly predict the future for everyone, but I can share with you what I've learned from working with teams from around the world and specifically looking at what startups are doing that are really kind of taking the future of work and employee engagement and culture, high performance, employee experience into the next level. The first lesson that I've learned from startups, and this is somewhere that I think most of us in the corporate world have really lost our way a lot, because we're focused so much on the needs of shareholders, on the P&L, on all of the compliance things. The thing that's missing for a lot of us in corporate is purpose. Startups are usually started by super passionate founders who are really, really passionate about wanting to solve a specific problem in the world. It's not necessarily about making money for them. That is a byproduct. It's about making a difference, making a positive impact. And they use that purpose statement of theirs as their North Star, their true north that guides everything that they do. It's their why. And I think in corporates, we very much have lost that. So one of the first pieces of advice I'd like to share today is that it's time for us to go back to that why, because startups are great at articulating the why of their existence and connecting it to a greater purpose, and then using that to distill very, very clearly and succinctly their core corporate values and crafting their culture. The next thing that they do from that purpose statement and that why is that they are very, very good at crafting compelling employer brands. What we're seeing with the Great Resignation, and we were seeing it long before the pandemic really, is a massive seismic power shift where employees are actually interviewing you. It's no longer, oh, what skills do you bring to the table? There's lots of skills out there. As an employer, I'd like to know from you, how are you going to help me connect to a greater purpose? How are you going to help me to learn and grow both professionally and personally? And what these startups are doing is they are crafting really compelling employer brands, and they're using this as a marketing tool to actually attract and retain the right talent. So instead of necessarily having to advertise vacancies, they are able to laser focus in on the right type of candidate, find them wherever they are online, whether it is in Amazon book reviews or whether it is in some Reddit room somewhere. They're able to find these people and entice them to come and work for them. And that's really something that we need to start working on as corporate business and HR leaders, is our employer branding. The next thing, of course, touches on the whole work from anywhere concept, but it's more than about where we work from. We are very, very bad as corporate leaders at giving people autonomy. I don't know where it started. I don't know if it's out of fear, where we became so focused on having people at a desk for 8 or 9 hours a day that we kind of lost focus of what's important, which is their output. The new generation of talent, and it's not just new generation, it's old people like me as well. I'm 45. I think I'm sufficiently old. It's about working how you want and from where you want. Some people work best in the middle of the night. Other people are morning people. They want to work between 6 a.m. and kind of be done by 12. People want flexibility. They want autonomy. And as much as we might be afraid as corporate leaders, the truth is that most people kind of like earning a salary. They kind of like paying their bills. So there's a very small possibility that they're going to mess this up. So it's really incumbent on us to make a massive mindset shift and start encouraging that autonomy for the people that we're hiring. Another place that we really need to focus on as corporates is on collaboration and teamwork. Now, most startups obviously start really small and they've got very limited resources in terms of talent and access to talent, and in terms of funds and being able to pay really big salaries. So what that does is it's a small team of people who have to really work together and aren't really that strict around job titles and role content and having a 5-page role profile and having a Patterson job grade, right? It's about working together towards a common purpose. In corporates, what we've done, because we're so focused on shareholders and on profits and on cost centers, we've gone and we've set up these massive hierarchies and these silos, and we don't work very well together. We actually compete against each other. And we've got these terrible habits around holding onto information and that approach of, oh, it's above your pay grade, which is really not going to work in the new world of work. It's about ease of access to information. It's about transparency, autonomy, and working together towards a common purpose. So that's really something that we need to look at, breaking down those silos and those barriers within our organizations. Following on from the whole concept of collaboration and teamwork is the concept of psychological safety. Now, I was personally quite mortified a couple of years ago on a very big SAP SuccessFactors rollout when a manager from one of the big 4 management consultancies in South Africa didn't know what psychological safety was. And it occurred to me that if someone that senior in one of the leading management consultancies is not familiar with this term, then a lot of people might not be. And this is really a space where HR can help from an OD perspective with leadership development in all of our teams. Psychological safety is really about people bringing their whole self to work and feeling that they can contribute, they can experiment, they can ask questions, they can make mistakes without fear of negative repercussions. And I mean, I'm not talking about major catastrophic things. I'm talking about, day-to-day kind of mistakes that aren't going to get held against you. So psychological safety and having that life raft and having that feeling of a team, almost a tribe, not in a toxic way where, people have got your back to the point where they'll lie to shareholders, but in a nurturing, empowering way, is really where workplaces are going, because psychological safety really builds positive culture, which builds positive employee engagement. The next thing that I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, of course, is agile methodology. Now, agile methodology in terms of project management has very much moved out of the DevOps space and being a thing that only the techie people use. It's moved into mainstream project management, and it's been used on all kinds of projects that I'm seeing in the workplace. So it's really something that we all need to upskill ourselves in. And again, it's a mindset shift. The whole idea of co-creating a solution, of listening to end users, listening to customers, listening to employees, focusing on building an experience, putting people ahead of process or profits. The whole idea of progress over perfection. So it's an iterative approach instead of that waterfall approach. And we've got numerous work streams all working parallel, concurrently, to deliver on the goals of the project and on those milestones. So it's really important that we embrace this and that we start upskilling ourselves and our managers within the organization to start really embracing agile methodology. So again, another little OD project for everyone, right? And agile doesn't really work in organizations that have got massive hierarchies and need a committee to approve a committee, to have a meeting, to establish a steering committee, right? So it's also about eliminating all of that red tape and removing those barriers to success. Ooh, the one that's the most scary for everyone. The robots are coming. Now, from an automation perspective, and this is very important within HR and within any organization, automation, the rise of machine learning, AI, makes it really possible for us to automate some of the transactional, day-to-day, repetitive tasks. And what it enables us to do then is to focus our attention on the soft skills and the human side. And with all of the HR tech that we have available these days, you know, it's doing things like automating leave applications and me being able to submit my expense reports electronically from my phone. All of those things are automation, which makes HR's job a lot easier, and which shouldn't really need to fear for HR around what is our next and where do we belong. Where we belong is in a coaching and a mentoring capacity, and in the capacity to actually really help shape these conversations and shape these workplaces. And automation actually frees us up to be able to do this. So it's definitely something to be looking at in terms of digital transformation. And speaking of digital transformation, one of my favorite things is data-driven decision-making. Data analytics and the ability to analyze data and use it to predict future behavior, future movements, to really see what's happening, that is truly, truly powerful stuff. We can use data analytics to literally predict which employees are likely to leave us next and where we're going to need to be filling in gaps. So if you're not already all over data-driven decision-making, I reckon you need to get onto it soon. A very, very big favorite of mine, and something that I've seen is very important in even the big corporates, some really big companies here in the UK especially, and I've seen in the US as well, is community involvement and giving back. This is something that startups do really well, and I think as corporate employers, we're not always that great at. We might have our CSI initiatives, you know, or our community development initiatives, but I think the lack there is in terms of communicating to our employees what we're really busy with and how they can get involved in giving back to the community, sharing their skills, sharing their expertise. Again, just being bigger, part of something that's bigger than you, something that's, you know, a little bit broader than just your little job that you do every day for your little paycheck. It's just about opening things up and just connecting, because people really want to connect, especially now as we're coming out of this pandemic and people have been feeling so very isolated, and people are really battling to see the impact of the work that they're doing, not just in the organization, but definitely in the community as a whole. So this is something for HR and business leaders to work on together with the folks in marketing and PR and whatever other divisions we need to get involved in, because it is also a very big hook from an employer branding perspective. People want to know Where are you on sustainability? What community projects do you have ongoing right now? And those are the kinds of things that are going to make them decide whether they want to work with you or whether they're going to go and work for one of your competitors. The final lesson that I've seen from startups, and this is going to be a very tough one in the corporate world, is that profit isn't the end goal. The end goal is making a difference and making a positive impact. Profit is a byproduct thereof. And I think it's important for all of us to get back to the roots of why our founders got into business in the first place. What problems are we solving in the community, in Africa, on any continent, in the world? What contribution are we making? How are we making things better? And when we can start adequately connecting to that purpose and really start engaging our employees in that bigger purpose, that is actually when you'll see them really start to soar, and you'll see your employee engagement and your motivation go through the roof, because people can connect those dots and they can see how they're making a positive contribution. And I promise you, the high performance, the efficiency, the profits, the impact on your bottom line, it's going to follow automatically if you just start connecting to purpose and engaging people more on a heart level than just on a hands and a head level. So to recap for you, really, these 10 lessons relate to core purpose and values. It's getting back to our why. It's looking at how we structure jobs, from job descriptions to getting people to be really honest about what they're good at and what their preferences are and what they don't really want to do. It's about how teams work together, how we treat our people in the workplace, how they treat each other. Culture is ridiculously important. The other lessons relate really to the use of technology, automation, and data-driven decision-making, the importance of giving back to the community, and then the fact that profit will follow as a natural byproduct. So I know that this is a bit of a scary time. As HR and as corporate leaders, we're very much in flux right now. We're in transition. We're not entirely sure what our next is. But what I can assure you is that we're not going to get to our next by clinging to the behaviors and the beliefs of the past. It's time for us to embrace new ways of working, new ways of being. And maybe it's time for us to start looking at what startups are doing that is so successful and that is just so much different to how we've been doing things traditionally. So it's really an opportunity and it's an adventure. And I hope that you're going to take these steps and that you're going to incorporate at least some of these 10 things in your people strategy, your OD strategy for the next year, the next 3 years.
What is very, very clear from a couple of the addresses that we've had now is that the equation is definitely people over profit, and of course including the purpose in terms of what binds us into it. And to reiterate Deborah's notes on needing to go back to the why. This is why we are having these critical and consequential conversations, because we definitely need to go back in answering these questions of, does your company care? Do you even subscribe to what we know as the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to of course inform the data-driven decision-making that comes into you taking into account those monitoring and evaluation, accountability and learning and development systems that we definitely have to embed in before we can even start to think about bringing in all the technologies. That was Deborah Harting, Sparkfluencer, a leadership and culture change maker, the author of Talent Liberation, and she was engaging on navigating the next of the workplace. We now move into our first megatrend of financial wellness, sponsored by Old Mutual, and invite John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual, with an opening address into this megatrend, employing a magnifying glass onto how we can create a pandemic-proof work design that definitely contributes to employee wellness. What we also are going to do now is hand over this opening address to John on how to create a pandemic-proof work design that definitely contributes to the employee wellness, covering some of the points that, of course, have been hinted at by our previous speakers. Please welcome to the virtual stage John Manyike, the Head of Financial Inclusion and Education at Old Mutual Limited.
Thank you very much for having me. I would like to just hop in as well on that subject. And I quite liked what the previous speaker said, particularly the point she made about people over profit. And that's what we're going to be talking about, as we present our On the Money program, especially in a challenging time such as this. So in order to do that, we're going to be able to highlight what are some of the impacts of financial constraints in the workplace. And I'm going to start off with a very, very short clip of an interview we did on Power FM a couple of months ago on this very subject.
This is the Express Edition. Fridays. This is the Express Edition. Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
6:29, we move swiftly to a very fascinating conversation, and one that I think is going to be quite important and top of the agenda for many businesses. And here we are talking about employee well-being affecting the bottom line of any business. Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual, John Manyike, joins us for this conversation. Manyike, good evening.
Good evening to you.
A pleasure to be speaking to you, and this is quite an important conversation in a time of a global pandemic. How critical has, focusing on the well-being of employees become?
It's very, very critical, especially given the fact that, as South Africa is trying to get back to business, to normalize things. Unfortunately, the reality is we have a lot of employees who are still grappling with the realities of salary reductions, increasing levels of debt, and generally the cost of living, with a lot of job losses that we've seen. Now, the problem here is, for employers to see at least some difference in the bottom line, they have to understand that employee well-being is very important, because you cannot separate an employee from their personal life and some of the financial stresses that they have. And unfortunately, when that plays out in the workplace, it tends to affect productivity levels. It affects the employee's ability to meet the employer standards. And then you end up having situations where, the employer is affected as people leave employment to find alternative employment in order to pay off their debt.
This is the Express.
So that was a very short clip on that specific subject. It was a bit longer, but we just shortened it for the benefit of this session. So we want to highlight a couple of things that we see as impacts of financial constraints in the workplace. Well, for a lot of employers, you might see this as labor issues or industrial relations issues, but from a financial well-being point of view, we see these as some of the constraints. Some of the common examples are absenteeism. We know from Stats SA that South African employers lose about 16 billion rand to absenteeism. And of course, there's another phenomenon called presenteeism, where employees do turn up for work, but actually are not productive. We see, trends around sick leave abuse, and then also employees resigning in order to access their pension to pay off their debts. Fraud and theft also tends to become an issue as employees trying to make ends meet, and they end up being creative. Workplace accidents also happen because when an employee is preoccupied about their financial difficulties and they are not focused and are disturbed, and they can easily cause an accident. This could be an accident in a manufacturing setup. It could also be paying money to a wrong client, and employers would either call that gross negligence or any other similar charge. But in which case, if you understand the root cause, you know that This could be finding expression in their financial difficulties. Productivity levels, certainly a given, when employees are not focused. Health problems, which ultimately affects, the sick leave trends or absence management, depression and anxiety, substance abuse, as well as lack of concentration at work. And then, of course, the most common one, where employees are simply demanding higher wage increase above inflation, very often done through their trade unions. But again, as you can see, that these are quite common, especially in the workplace. Other impacts on the organization includes employees end up bringing in a lot of their personal issues at work, and this is why employers have employee assistance program where they provide counseling to their employees, discipline issues, team relations issues. As you would imagine, some employees can borrow money from each other, and then it can also start affecting team relations and interpersonal skills. Recruitment costs tend to go higher as employees resign to try and find a better income. Litigation could also happen when employees compromise the values of the employer with their customers and stakeholders. Training costs as you continue to hire new staff. As of course, the reputation of the organization can also be at risk. So those are some of the things. So we've done a research which we do on an annual basis called Old Mutual Savings and Investment Monitor. And what the results are telling us is that 87% of people that we survey, particularly those living in metropolitan areas, claim that COVID has changed the way they think about money and the way they manage money. And then we also saw about 38% reporting that they are earning less than what they were earning before COVID. I mean, these are real financial difficulties that employees find themselves in. We're also picking up some positive trends, although in the same process where about 62% of people who were surveyed are starting to cut expenses where they can, starting to build a buffer and then handling debt, trying to pay down their debt as far as possible. So we have a program called On the Money Financial Education Program, which is our well-being program, which we offer to employers. And we also do a further research, particularly on employees, as well as the broad communities who attend this program. And what we found through our partnership with our monitoring and evaluation strategic partner, which is DNA Economics, they found that about 13% of people who have gone through this program have reported that there's an increase in their savings. And so they started saving more. And we've also seen about 15% reduction in debt as a result of them attending the program. We also found that a lot of them are feeling more financially secure after attending the program because they understand that there are ways out of the situation that they find themselves in. So the question is, why should you implement a financial well-being program? Okay, quite a number of reasons we can talk to there. Of course, you're going to help employees make informed financial decisions. You're helping your employees to manage their financial life. As we said earlier in that clip, that you cannot separate an employee's financial life, from their work life. One will affect the other. And of course, an unhappy worker cannot deliver, even if you're not necessarily the cause as an employer, but simply by the employee not being able to manage their finances. But it's also a demonstration of care by an employer to the employee that you do care about their well-being. And the program that we offer in order to address some of those challenges that we've highlighted there is made available for free to employers as well as to communities at large as part of our transformation scorecard and commitment to the financial sector charter to transform and to promote financial inclusion. So we have face-to-face engagement. We run these workshops also through online platforms. We've got a very strong presence on social media. And we plant, a lot of our content in the media through broadcast, and we also do a lot of engagements through online platforms, and we have an app that we'll be launching very soon. We've got quite a very strong footprint of facilitators across the country. These are our own employees whose sole purpose is to train employees in the workplace. And we also send them to communities. So we have staff that can converse in the local language, and they are able to make relevant examples. This is an example, or rather a list of some of our clients who have been beneficiaries of this particular program, that have gone through the program over the years, and will gladly add you on that list. Another important thing which I want to highlight before I show you the next clip is that because we know that financial concepts of financial education very often is seen as a boring subject. It's not that exciting to a lot of people. So one way in which we try and infuse a bit of excitement and fun in it is that we engage celebrities and artists, and we offer them financial education. We then ask them to talk about what they've learned to an audience through a masterclass. We then take that content and repackage and play it back to your employees. Your employees, in most cases, you find that they are big fans and they're highly influenced by these celebrities. Let me show you a few clips, and we'll start with one that we did at our M Studios.
M Studios brought to you by Old Mutual.
I was just so fixated by the idea of getting rich.
For me, it was do or die.
Fame is not what you see, guys. It's hard work.
I know I used to get paid 500 Rand when I was still starting up, but now, 2 zeros there.
I really messed up.
I've lost a lot of money.
The 30 years, it was just hand to mouth.
Whether you're in the limelight or not, it remains real life. Financial problems are part of real life.
You can't say just because I had a hit this year, I'm going to be here 20 years from now. It's not even about how talented you are, because that's not the thing.
1 minute you're big, 1 minute abasakwazi structure, so mekhone ngiyacela.
It's in those cents that make a difference. When I went through my tax issue, personally, I was hit with 2.7 million. I started having to learn what expenses are about.
One of the things that we fall into is we make money as musicians and then we think, oh, let's buy a car, let's buy a chain. For what?
We've got that mentality of we're poor. When we have that money, we gotta spend it.
I need to look at my pocket. I need to understand where I am as a brand, as a person, as an individual, as a breadwinner.
You have to build that money to trust it on the day that is not as bright as yesterday, that it'll take care of you.
You can't get this money and put it aside for yourself.
If you don't have a plan, you're gonna fall into somebody else's plan who doesn't have a plan for you.
Every DJ, most of the DJ artists basically, in order for them to sustain their careers, it's cool, you're releasing albums or whatever, but what else can you do?
At first, we just thought the music was going to give us the money and that's it. There's plenty of other things that you can venture out into as a person, not even as an artist. You have to look at your music or your first passion as just like a vehicle.
It's not the time for you to go and buy things that are going to go away quickly. Buy an asset or two.
Yes, cars, it's nice to drive a car, but it's just for a moment. And tomorrow you're broke. You know, putting your money in property works better.
I always bought tiny little cars, and then I invested my money in a house.
You know, we all start where we don't have money, and we don't want to go back there. For you to be financially independent, you need to keep going in your hustle. You spend on investments.
I'm into commodities, trading.
An asset could be an apartment, could be a studio space, mics and instrument, everything that helps you keep on going.
If you have a brand, invest in it.
Think about the day where you're not going to have a gig, where you're not going to have a hit.
They say, penny wise, pound foolish. Plant a penny and watch it grow.
I think as I conclude, I'll play the last clip, and then that will be the end of my presentation. Again, as I said, I mean, it's about repackaging the content and playing back to employees with people that they relate to and that we know that they're highly influenced by. So I'll play the last clip, and that will be the end of my presentation.
Guess what? One of you is going to be the winner of this year's season. You know when they say money talks? Yeah. Some people are talking to money, but money is not talking back. In fact, money is blue ticking you.
Think beyond this thing that you're now exposed. You need to be thinking, how do I expand on this? Think creatively about how to diversify your income. Artists who struggle in their career, it's because they don't have
alternatives. It's like a one-trick pony. You can't do anything except singing. That's the problem.
What I learned today is that you can not only have something in the music industry as well, but have a different plan as well. And when people tell you, you need a side plan, it's actually making sense to me now.
There's actually like life in the music industry financially, you know, when you open your mind.
You shouldn't spend more than you earn, and that we should treat the singing as business.
You need to be able to take advice. You need to be able to sit yourself down and discipline yourself when it comes to finances as well.
When you have a gig and you get 10,000, just don't spend all of it because there's still tomorrow.
You need to invest in yourself. You need to have a vision if you are an artist. Any investor needs to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to have a problem.
You need to think of tomorrow and where is your family going to be if you are reckless with your money now. So invest and save, not just one or the other, because saving, short term, you need things to pay. Invest, long term.
I think you and I need to swap roles now. 10 out of 10. Well done. Give a big round of applause. Make sure you surround yourself with experts. When it comes to your finances, speak to a financial advisor, you know, so you have a proper financial plan in place.
I just think it's very important to know when to spend and where your money needs to go.
Don't be scared to ask for advice from experts and plan for the future.
What I learned today was that I need to respect money, not to use it recklessly.
I don't know whether to give myself credit or give you credit for being brilliant students. Well done. Thank you. Give a big round of applause. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to the studio.
That was John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual Limited, really unpacking some of these concepts and rather for me the cost of financial constraints in the workplace from an organizational perspective, but also from the employee perspective. And what I appreciate and something that we're going to delve into in just a few moments with our panel discussion before we bring in our next speaker is looking at the role of not only company culture, but popular culture, because this is something that impacts an entire society, new entrants in the workplace. So it's very important that we don't fill it up too much with the business jargon, but ensure that from a language perspective, from a culture perspective, that we definitely are expanding it. And of course, one other thing that I really want to bring into this panel discussion that we'll be having is, of course, the feelings that are attached to the money conversation. There were mentions of feelings of shame that were brought up into how we are engaging with our money. But this is definitely a conversation that's not only for the executives, but the interns, the junior managers that are being brought into how you could actually engage people and leadership management. I am enjoying your tweets as well. And as we get ready to introduce our next speaker within the theme and this mega trend that we have of financial wellness and financial well-being in the workplace, I'm going to go to two tweets that are standing out for me, particularly as a response to this presentation and address by John. We're coming to Gevaarlik at Gevaarlik21, and he says, mental health at work, yes, this is a real issue, guys, and many people are getting depression because of this. And our final tweet is coming from Buntle DVD, and she says financial well-being policy is new to her, and she always saw this as an intervention and not part of HR operations. Well, these are the biases that we're engaging in and the new challenges and ideas that we definitely are wanting to bring forth and the kinds of conversations that we want you to be a part of. Expanding expanding on the theme of financial wellness and the impact of financial constraints in the workplace, we'd like to welcome Dr. Fundile Nyati, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions.
Good morning, everybody. I've been asked to come and share some information about mental health in the workplace and how that is affecting, human resource management. What are the trends currently and what are the future trends? So I'll start with a quote from a US-based, political commentator or an opinion maker, George F. Will, who said, sometimes a future has a way of arriving unannounced and uninvited. This can't be more true than this COVID-19 pandemic. And when you talk to economists, they normally talk of black swan events. And that kind of an event, it's something that is extremely rare, something that's got a severe impact, something that just disrupts everything that you know. And with this COVID-19 pandemic, we surely have an ultimate black swan event. Now, just before I get to talking about the mental health issues, just to say in South Africa, as at 5 p.m. yesterday, we had 2.93 million people who have tested positive, and also 89,584 people who have died from COVID since the 5th of March in 2020. So yesterday we posted just 312 cases, but over the last 7 days, we actually have been seeing an increase in numbers to an extent that there is worry, with the National Institute of Communicable Diseases that we are beginning our fourth wave. So we've gone through the 3 waves. A lot of emotional trauma has taken place over these 3 waves, and now there is an imminent 4th wave. So just to talk about mental health then, when we say somebody, has got, optimal mental health or mental well-being, what are we talking about? Here we're saying that person should be able to fulfill at least 4 things. 1, individual should be able to realize his or her own potential, be able to cope with the normal stresses of life, be able to work productively and fruitfully, and also be able to contribute to his or her community. So when people have got, dysfunction at a mental health level, then you'll find that one or more of these are not realized, and that's where the problem begins, especially in the workplace. Now, in preparing for this, presentation, I came across, one of the quotations in one of the journals I was reading, and that was saying, during any outbreak of infectious diseases, the population's psychological reaction play a critical role in shaping both the spread of the disease and the occurrence of emotional distress and social disorder, either during or after the outbreak. Now, what we have seen with COVID-19 is that there has been a lot of emotional distress and social disorder, and long after the physical illnesses relating to the pandemic have passed, we will still be left with major issues at a psycho-emotional level. And one of the problems, though, is that most governments and organizations tend to not focus a lot on the psychological and the psychiatric impact of the pandemic and focus more on the physical aspects of what the pandemic brings. Now, another professor from King's College in London, Professor Tony Croft, in December last year, he said, alongside the sometimes severe and fatal physical consequences of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, there is a threat that is far often less discussed, yet it's got major health implications. And the true breadth and depth of the silent epidemic is now becoming clear. He's referring to mental health challenges that are going with COVID-19. All right, my slide there has just stopped. All right, so pre-COVID in South Africa, a lot of studies have been done one study that was done by the University of Stellenbosch actually found that at least 1 in 4 working people in South Africa suffer from mental illness, especially, depression. That is 1 in 4, or 25%. That was before COVID. Now, the trends that are coming through are actually showing that anything between 40 and even 60% of people who are working are actually suffering from mental distress or actual mental illness. In one of the weekly newspapers in South Africa, News 24 City Press, on the 20th of May, they said there's a mental health tsunami that is brewing in the workforce, and it's not just stress. It is now somebody who has gone beyond being stressed and decompensated to having a mental illness, which can be depression or anxiety disorder or psychosis or any other type of a mental illness. Now, so what is the link between the pandemic that we are dealing with now and mental disability? Well, there is a lot of connection between the two, and that connection comes from two levels. The effects of the lockdown or isolation on individuals, the complicated grief that people go through as they experience multiple losses, and these are primary losses, that is loss of a loved one or a friend or a colleague, but also secondary losses, that is loss of how they used to experience life. Depression, anxiety, paranoia, PTSD, obsessive behavior, increased substance dependency, burnout syndrome, hoarding, because people don't want, they are worried about losing jobs, so they end up hoarding work and not wanting to cooperate with other employees in the workplace, generalized psychosocial stress, and worsening of existing mental health problems. That's just one part of how mental health challenges are affecting, employees in the workplace. The other part is, complications from the disease itself, either directly caused by the virus or by the immune system reaction to the virus, causing destruction of the various cells and tissues across the body, with long-term sequelae, which can affect, the brain function, causing things like delirium, dementia, inability to sleep, psychosis, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar mood disorder, relapse of existing mental health issues, and burnout syndrome. So that is how the interplay between the pandemic and the mental health challenges. All right. And so what we're seeing then in workplaces is that employees are having trouble, at a cognitive level with concentrating. They are forgetful, impaired attention, executive dysfunction, low processing speed, disrupted social cognition and language, impaired learning, impaired problem-solving abilities, and impaired verbal fluency. On the psychosocial side, impaired interpersonal functioning, recklessness or carelessness in terms of how they do their work, emotional dependence and need for reassurance, impaired touch with reality, that is on the psychosis side, low energy levels, restlessness, inappropriate workplace-related behavior, symptoms associated with burnout, which are basically mental and physical exhaustion, being, removed from one's work and having a cynical view to one's work, and decrease in productivity, that is burnout, disengagement from work, presentism, and extreme mood states and changes. So a study that was done then at the beginning of the pandemic here in South Africa, done by South African Depression and Anxiety Group, actually found that about 59% of the people that were respondents already had 59%, levels of stress. They presented with stress and were very stressed. And during COVID, it increased to about 65%. And what they found was that 55% of these people had anxiety and panic. 46% had financial stress and pressure, something that talks to the previous presentation by Mr. Manyike. 41%, were removed from family and friends. Other people were actually feeling isolated because they were staying alone. Another study that was done, I think this is in the UK, found that 45% of people had increased anxiety. All right, anxiety is a normal emotional reaction to uncertainty or to what you do not know. So the fear of the unknown, and it may, at a certain point, if one is not able to deal with it, it may cause dysfunction. 48% had depressive disorders, and 22% had increased stress. Right, another study that was done by Erika Hitchens et al. Found that about 60% of the people that were surveyed, 3 in 5, experienced depression, anxiety, or both. And also 8 in 10, that's 80%, experienced symptoms of moderate to severe distress, not necessarily an illness. So that just shows you that not only in South Africa, but also globally, the issue of mental health impact, is a big problem. A study done by SADC again before COVID, had looked at issues of depression, burnout, and trauma, domestic violence, and substance abuse in South Africa as the drivers of impaired mental health or illness. But now, in the time of COVID, you then throw in now the issue of technology, or what we call Zoom fatigue, the sedentary lifestyles where there's less time for exercise, physical connection, and loneliness. And the disruption of the work-life balance. So you then find that those are now the new drivers of mental health challenges. All right. So now I've already mentioned the issue of Zoom fatigue, but it's not necessarily Zoom. I mean, anybody who's using these platforms, whether it is Teams or Blue Jeans or any of the platforms, but they just chose to call it a Zoom fatigue. And we now know that people spend longer hours in meetings, meeting after meeting without any break in between. And the amount of energy one needs to be able to follow the discussions during those kind of interactions is actually more than, when you meet people on a face-to-face level. So the issue of Zoom fatigue is a major, major problem across the world. A study done and that was published in the Lancet Psychiatry in April this year found that 33% of people who have survived COVID will, within a 6 months period, present with a neuropsychiatric problem, a neurological problem or psychiatric problem within 6 months of infection. Now that poses problems for employers. There's also another concept called long COVID. And what is that? Long COVID is where somebody survived from COVID. However, 4 weeks after surviving from COVID, they still present with persistent symptoms of COVID or new or long-term complications of that infection. And that is becoming now the bigger problem. And now, as the medical people, we know that COVID-19 is not just a respiratory illness. It is an illness that affects every part of our body. And so we are seeing people who are presenting with persistent symptoms more than a month after they've recovered. And those are, for example, affecting the brain, where somebody's got anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, PTSD, cognitive disturbances, what we call brain fog, persistent headaches, generalized symptoms like fatigue, decline in the quality of their lives, muscular weakness, joint pain at a respiratory system level, inability to breathe, persistent cough, persistent oxygen requirements, at a heart level, palpitations, chest pains, and also, difficulty in terms of effort tolerance, clotting throughout the body, kidney problems, and hair loss. So the problem of long COVID can affect any system, and more often than not, there's more than one system that is affected, and that presents problems for employers. Study done in Wuhan, which is the first city to have this problem of COVID-19, actually showed that after a year, of people having recovered, they are still suffering from some of these, health challenges at a brain level, memory problems, difficulty in sleeping, emotional problems, depression, anxiety, at a respiratory level, difficulty in breathing. And so this is what was seen in a study that was released in August, having been monitored by the professors in Wuhan. So we did our own study here in South Africa, by the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, their Public Health Surveillance and Response Division. They looked at 1,448 patients who were admitted in both public and private sector, and they found that 82% of patients still had persistent symptoms or even new symptoms more than a month after discharge. Irrespective of the severity of the disease, when people got COVID, anyone can actually present with long COVID. And what they've found is that at least 10%, 1 in 10 of people who are infected will have, long COVID. And they even think this 1 in 10 is an underestimation. So what am I trying to say here? I'm saying employers are now faced with a new tsunami that follows the time where people have recovered from COVID. And to deal with it, it needs a multidisciplinary, approach. And what they've also found in the US is that the rehabilitation, or recovery from rehabilitation from COVID-19 is actually even much more difficult than the rehabilitation for people who are recovering from cancer. So, as employers, what needs to happen? Well, having read some of your journals as Topco, I picked up, some of the, the trends that are coming through, that there is a need for, soft skills amongst employees, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, independent problem solving. There is a need to embrace technology, so digital transformation is moving very, very fast. But more importantly, in the area of employee wellness, the lack of separation of work and life as a result of remote working has caused problems. So employers need to look beyond the one day that is put aside as mental health day. Employers need to be much more proactive in assisting their employees to deal with stress so that it does not graduate to become mental illness. Employers need to create the right kind of culture that would enable people to be able to open up when they are suffering, to talk about, their mental health problems. Because what was found by those professors from Stellenbosch is that whilst 25% of the employees have got, mental health problems, only a quarter of that actually come forward and seek help. 75% of them, they do not come forward because of fear of discrimination, fear of stigmatization, fear that they may be overlooked for promotions and projects if they come forward. So employers have an obligation to create a much more conducive environment. Another, article that came from one of the Topco magazines again also showed that health and wellness is now at the center of HR, or people management. And if employers do not invest, in the health and wellness of their employees, they are likely to have challenges going forward with respect to productivity, competitiveness, service delivery, and the bottom line. So what is it that employers should do then? Well, employers need to align their company policies and practices to what is expected in terms of the law, our Constitution, Employment Equity Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and also, the Labor Relations Act. It's important for employers to perform random surveys and data analysis about issues of mental well-being and the impact on employees, create the right environment and workplace culture that makes employees able to open up about their challenges, monitor productivity, measure employee morale, and be able to also, where they see decrease in productivity, zoom in to find out what are the issues. So the company wellness programs need to now be much more robust, and the information from there should actually help organizations to plan better on what they need to do to support their employees who are suffering from mental health challenges. lives. Managers need to be much more switched on issues of mental health, employees' roles and responsibilities and support needs to be much more clarified. Communication, awareness programs about issues of mental health, especially when it comes to men, because as men, we tend not to, come forward and acknowledge that we are not coping. Yet, when it comes to suicide, we are the gender that actually contributes more towards the suicide rates. So those are just some of the issues in the workplace. Creating a culture of virtual care and reconnection, understanding that we are together even though we are apart. Employers, they need to understand their duty of care, maintain that culture of understanding, empathy, and compassion, ensure that there's regular check-ins with the employees, even if they are working from home, and sometimes create those water cooler moments, intentional check-ins, using the virtual platforms. And managers must know that even though they themselves going through challenges as a result of the pandemic, but as psychological parents to staff, they also need to step forward, provide stability, predictability, engender the dialogue, especially around issues of loss and grief, provide that compassionate support, and be able to know when to refer to the EAP programs. I already talked about the issue of Zoom fatigues and what needs to be done, keeping meetings brief, tuning in from outside, opting for the speaker view, taking notes on paper, avoiding back-to-back calls, and the issue of economics. Most of the people who are working from home don't have the chairs that have got good economic support. So these are just some of the things that needs to be addressed by employers, not only for the people who are in the workplace, but also for those who are working from home. So the issue of isolation and loss of connection is really a big problem. So as one of the business strategists, Peter Drucker, once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, it is to act with yesterday's logic. So as we are facing this pandemic, we need to reset, start to think, and be innovative on how we can mitigate this risk, to our employees and to our businesses. So that is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Right now, when it comes to managing your money, it's a jungle out there. That's why you need a strong partner to lead the way. On the Money offers local employers and trade unions access to free virtual financial education workshops for their staff, packed with practical tips to help their employees manage their personal and family finances as smartly as possible. The time is now. Sign up your team today.
Indeed, some chilling statistics and not very bright pictures being painted on the current climate of what is happening when we are talking about financial wellness and well-being in the workplace. To introduce this incredible panel discussion that we are going to have in a very critical and consequential conversations, I am bringing back my panelists to the front, Dr. Fundile Nyati, the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions, and John Manyike, the Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual. Dr. Fundile, and perhaps to swing the pendulum back to you, to the notion, or rather this term of long COVID and the severity of this situation. How do companies really become pandemic proof? And is that something, as we're thinking perhaps a year or 2 years into the future, that we could really look at? Because we're talking about what is becoming really prominent in this discussion is culture, right? And our previous speaker really alluded to the point of how culture really eats strategy. So what are the strategic solutions that we could be looking at? Are we looking at perhaps introducing COVID leaves? Are we looking at, the importance of having these empathetic leaders? Because to your point, you're highlighting, that managers are now becoming staff off. So how are we reeling in and saying that, looking at this near future, how do we become pandemic proof, and also at the very same time highlight the importance of culture into this conversation?
All right, thank you very much. Well, like I said, the last time there was a pandemic of this level was in 1918. So that's about 103 years ago. So this issue is new for everyone. Now, what one needs then in organizations is to first recognize that COVID-19 pandemic, is a major business risk. All right, it's a major business risk. A lot of companies have not been walking the talk when it comes to, health issues. On World AIDS Day, somebody will stand and say, our employees are our best assets, but when you then say, all right, how can we assist you to look after those assets? You find that, there's not even a budget. So employers need to now take health risk, the health risk of their employees, and make it a strategic, area, because we now know without health, everything can come to a standstill. So the organizations must therefore start to take seriously matters of health. And number two, creating that culture that recognizes that we are all going through this and we are all not coping. Our previous coping mechanisms, were able to help us with previous issues, but this is something new. And this is something where we must all play a role to solve it. Number three, creating awareness about this problem. Was like all risk, you identify a risk and then you communicate about the risk, so that people can then be able to be part of managing the risk. So communication of the risk of COVID-19, creating awareness amongst your staff in an ongoing manner with a lot of repetition, that will help people to be knowledgeable. Now we are starting with the problem of vaccine hesitancy. And part of the reason for the vaccine hesitancy that we are seeing in this country is because, at a workplace level, employers have not educated their employees about COVID-19 and about the fact that, the only tool available at this moment to turn things around are vaccines. And so in South Africa, we have just over 41% of adults who have had at least one jab, 35% of adults who are fully vaccinated. And we are not going to meet the 70% at the end of the year. So what should be employers doing? Employers must actually play a positive role in ensuring that they educate their people, gently persuade their people to do the right thing. This is the only tool we have in the toolbox to turn around the things. Number three, understand that they have a legal obligation to provide a safe and healthy work environment for all their employees, vaccinated and unvaccinated. All right? And those who are vaccinated, they also need to be protected against the vaccinated. And those who refuse to be vaccinated, actually, the law does allow for employers, if they have found that COVID-19 is a risk to their workplace, to actually identify it as such and consider implementing vaccine mandates if all the gentle persuasion does not work. So those are just some of the things that need to be done. So bold, courageous leadership that tries to be inclusive, that tries to empower people, but that is also understanding that you can't apply gentle persuasion forever. At some point, decisions have to be made on how to ensure that all employees are actually protected. Because how are you going to deal with an employee who refuses to come to the workplace because the person that they work with is refusing to be vaccinated? Those are just some of the considerations. So courageous, visionary leadership and the culture that is open, a culture that is empowering, a culture that doesn't have discrimination is what we need.
100%. And I think to your point around this bold leadership, it definitely will require us, per Peter Drucker, being poured back into the conversation again, acting with yesterday's knowledge or yesterday's logic rather, or rather the 103-year yesterday from which we face this global pandemic. And as we recognize that health is wealth, John, let me bring you into this discussion and looking particularly at the structures that organization can place, and particularly when we're talking about financial wellness, the effectiveness as well, if you can touch on that, on what has led to the On the Money program and what has driven that effectiveness, and what would be maybe 2 or 3 pointers that you can share for other organizations to consider as they are driving financial well-being.
No, absolutely. I mean, over the years, Old Mutual has always invested in financial education because we recognize the need for financial inclusion. And financial inclusion will be quite difficult to achieve unless you make reasonable steps and be deliberate in your approach to actually educate your workforce around money matters. Because I think, put it simply, employees work because they expect remuneration at the end of the month. So, well, unless you are in a company that takes volunteers who don't get paid. But by virtue of employees working in, offering their labor in exchange for remuneration, if they don't know how to manage that money, then it starts creating other challenges, which we've listed in our presentation, around absenteeism, fraud, theft, and so on and so forth. And that is why it's very, very important to actually put a very robust financial well-being programs. So whilst we recognize that a lot of employers out there who would actually pay for these services, which is okay if they can afford it, but there are financial institutions like Old Mutual who actually offer some of these financial education interventions, whether face-to-face or through virtual platforms. So we'd certainly encourage employers to look for those kind of partnerships in order to provide a financial well-being program for their employees. Because as we said earlier, that you cannot separate the employees' financial life from their work life, so ultimately one would actually affect the other. So those are things that we generally encourage employers to do. I think in the many years that we've been offering financial education, we've had some brilliant testimonials from a number of employers who have said to us, wow, we actually observed that even our garnish order has taken a sharp decline since the introduction of the On the Money program. Certainly the research that we've done on the program itself indicates that there is a reduction in debt amongst employees who are exposed to financial education. We've also seen an increase in employees saving for their future. So, and these are the very reasons why we believe that for an employer to mitigate those constraints in the workplace, you have to find a financial well-being partner.
And John, I want to stay on the theme of financial well-being and these solutions, because the people that are tuning in, or the innovators that are tuning in, the companies that are tuning in, are not only large organizations or financial institutions that have the capacity, that have the resources to be able to engage with their workers, but we're also dealing with small businesses. We're dealing with startups who perhaps do not have the capacity, do not have the resources to implement such interventions. And we want to congratulate them, I suppose, for taking that first step in going remote and embedding technology in how they are introducing such measures. But what would you say to them, to the smaller guys who also want to be active participant, and we of course know contribute largely to our GDP in South Africa and across the African continent as well? What would you ask them or consider for them to invest in as they are embarking on their journey? And perhaps they don't have the R1 million budget to be able to say, I'm going to come to a financial institution, or I'm going to go to an asset management firm and look after the financial well-being of my small team.
So certainly, and it really boils down to being strategic enough to recognize the need for a financial well-being for the employees, and that's why finding the right partner in that sense it makes sense. But don't rush to pay. You know, I know they say where there's a voice, there's an invoice. But I can assure you that with us, there's a voice, but there's certainly no invoice, and that's why you need to find such strategic partnerships where you find organizations who share your vision and are happy to partner with yourself where you don't have to pay. You know, of course, there are other services which are more sophisticated, like the counseling, which are things that employers can outsource. But for small businesses, I think you can start with a very simple financial well-being program where a partner like Old Mutual even comes to you instead of you coming to us. We come to you anywhere in the country. We'll come to you whether by road or by air, and there will never be an invoice in your direction to subsidize any of those costs. I mean, this is an investment that we have made to make sure that we remain relevant, but we also cultivate the market in which way we operate by plowing back in the communities, be it in the corporate space or in the broader community. And that's a commitment that we've made. And we recognize the need for even small businesses, you know, especially in the context of the economy, because we know that globally, small businesses are the ones that actually drive economies around the world. And that's why we don't leave small businesses out of the picture. So for me, it is that simple. You just a partner. Interestingly enough, we had an engagement with one big employer, very, very prominent employer with a national footprint. In fact, not only national, global footprint. And they told us, no, we have a service provider. We said, no, we don't have a problem if you want to keep your service provider. These are services. At the end of our engagement, they said, wow, actually, they saw that they could potentially cut 80% of the cost in terms of their employee well-being program by simply partnering with us where they know they don't have to actually pay for those services. The ones that are outsourced are the ones that are more sophisticated, the ones that require the services of experts like Dr. Nyati, whom we partner in many respects, by the way, you know, so because we found him very credible and the kind of work that he does, especially in the area that he's present. You can see he speaks with passion. He's not just a doctor because he spent years behind the desk, but he's really passionate about the stuff he talks about. So these are the kind of partners that we find as Old Mutual. So where we are not able to provide those expertise, we will introduce you to the likes of Dr. Fundi Nyati, who can assist in other areas, but at least you know the bulk of your cost, which you don't have to pay for, are already carried or subsidized by us.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear the efforts that a big organization like Old Mutual is taking to ensure that the smaller guys are also being taken care of. And I think partnerships and collaboration is definitely a big theme in this discussion of how we can definitely go farther together. Dr. Fundi, I want to shift gears a bit and bring in the employee into this conversation, because I think we've been hearing from management, we've been hearing from the employer in terms of what are the strides that are being taken from organizations like Old Mutual. But what is the employee's role in keeping the employers accountable? Because it could be a tick box exercise. It could be, you know, a policy that has been enforced, but you see that the implementation is not there. And earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned that about 75% of employees do not want to come ahead and say, I'm struggling, right? So what can they do? How can they vocalize that I am struggling, be it financially or be it with my mental well-being? And how can I hold my employer accountable?
Well, I think just understanding that the reason why that 75% of people who have a mental health challenge are not coming forward is because of the culture and the climate within that workplace. So the starting point, like I said earlier, is addressing that. So employers must be deliberate in creating that, but also proper programs, employee health and wellness programs, they need to have some steering committee, multi-stakeholder steering committee within that workplace, whereby they meet regularly and look at various issues that affect their total health, physical, mental, social, and spiritual health. And out of that, then have, a task team that would meet and raise issues, with management, so that those policies that are sitting in the intranet move from being in the intranet and actually get to be implemented. But the biggest challenge also that we find is that line managers, who are the people at the coalface, these are the people who work closely with the staff members. They are the ones who are supposed to identify very early when there's an employee who are not doing well. So again, empowering those line managers to be able to recognize an employee who is struggling either in terms of productivity or work attendance or presenteeism, but no productivity. That is very important. But employees must understand that matters of health and safety, are not nice to have in workplaces. There is a legal obligation for employers to provide for that. And therefore, they need to demand that the employers show them what they are doing. And if they are not doing much, there's even, a way whereby they can even go to the Department of Labor if they're not being listened to by management. So there's a lot of leverage that employees have under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to ensure that employers do the right thing. But they need to be organized. They need to be well represented. They need to engage with the right structures of leadership. And if they're not listened to, then they've got an avenue outside, which is the Department of Labor. So I think that's what is important. Having collaborations between management and employees, a shared understanding of the importance of health and safety matters in the workplace. That's what we need to see.
And on top of the legal obligations that employers have to face, what are the current and perhaps, for lack of a better term, trends that employees and both employers should really brace themselves for when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, when we're talking about this great tsunami in the midst of what even is being termed now the great resignation. In the next few months, we're talking about the near future. How can they prepare themselves for what's coming? And most importantly, what is coming?
Well, what is coming is the fact that we've just gone through 3 waves. The actuaries are predicting another wave from the middle of December, peaking around January, early next year. And those waves, they go hand in hand with people being admitted in hospitals. All right? Those things go with people dying. And so what needs to then happen is the employer working with the employees is to see this train that is coming, this 4th wave, and all the dangers that come with it, and to have honest discussion on how do we save lives. How do we make sure that even if you get infected, you will not end up in hospital? Those discussions around vaccination, very, very, very important. Demystifying the myths that are in social media, about, if you get jabbed, this is what will happen to you. So the void in terms of credible information needs to be addressed by employers. And I had mentioned before, gentle persuasion for people to do the right thing, because there's a study that was released just on the 4th of November by Discovery Health, the biggest medical aid administrator in this country. It shows unequivocally that those members of theirs, over 1.2 million, membership, those members of theirs who took the vaccine, actually do not get to be hospitalized, or certainly do not die. So that is the tsunami that is coming. The other tsunami is the long COVID, because those people, when they get infected, even if they got mild infection, they may get long COVID, brain fog. Senior manager, executive who was high functioning at an executive level, and this person has got memory problems, this person has got thought, ability problems. This person cannot be able to analyze. So those are the challenges that are coming. And all of those can be mitigated if people actually use the only tool that is there, which is to take vaccination. So for me, that is what needs to be done. It is coming. And most employers are used to just dealing with doctors and stuff. But for employers, there is an obligation to reasonably accommodate employees, with temporary or even permanent impairments or disabilities. And now you need an occupational therapist, speech therapist, to actually work with doctors, and for you as an employer to be able to allow that OT to come in, analyze what kind of work did John Manyiga do, and now that he's got brain fog, how can we reasonably accommodate Mr. Manyiga so that he can still continue to add value to the organization, despite the fact that his memory, is not optimal. So getting used to working with occupational therapists, to do what we call job evaluation and functional capacity evaluation. It's something that now has to be a norm, whether it's a physical manifestation or a mental manifestation. So that are some of the things that are very, very important for us to consider, as we look at this fourth wave coming, and also the tsunami coming from the previous 3 waves that we've just gone through.
Absolutely. And John, we talk about the fourth wave that's coming. We're talking about the tsunami that's coming. We're talking about all of these ills that are happening, and particularly the great resignation within this context of HR innovation, of human capital management. And what is coming out is also this value add and impact that employers are now going to have to position themselves, and intentionally so, when we are talking about all of these waves and all of this negative impact that'll definitely constrain your employees to do so. So how will people be financially impacted? And is there a way to really pandemic-proof your workplace?
No, absolutely. I think, as we know, that we have a number of employees who are struggling with debt. Some are literally relying on credit to stay afloat, and just for them to be able to turn up for work, for those who are still physically going to work. But also, we are at the point where employees can ill afford another pandemic or some form of restriction that could affect their sector. We've seen how the storm of the pandemic has ravaged different sectors of our economy, where certain sectors were completely shut down. And sometimes even when you start introducing these restrictions where it actually disrupts the business, effectively it means there could be further impact on employees' income. And obviously once, if the employee continue to experience these pressures over and above what they are already experiencing with the challenges that they have financially, this could have devastating effects on the employer's bottom line, in the long term. Because obviously if your balance sheet is under enormous pressure because you're just not making enough income because of the restrictions and so on and so forth, there's a risk that more employees could lose their job, but ultimately even the business itself could get to a point where it actually shuts down. And this is why it's important to be proactive around these issues. So we're not saying there's a magic wand that can completely eradicate everything, but with everything that has been said from a medical point of view, but from a financial point of view, it's really about ensuring that there's a well-orchestrated program, very robust intervention that helps and supports employee, during these difficult times. And that's the one way you can, to some extent, COVID-proof your employees by offering them with that opportunity. So that's certainly what we will recommend from an Old Mutual perspective.
Absolutely. And as we get ready to wrap up this conversation, something that really stands out for me is all of these buzzwords that have been really prominent throughout this conversation. We're talking about interconnectedness, innovation, robustness. Everything is faster. There's productivity, the resilience, the agility, in order to really become what has become, the startup way of doing things. Because the work hasn't changed, but it's how we work that has changed, and how we'll definitely impact the way we do work, definitely impact human capital management. And as I invite your closing remarks on this particular conversation, if you can, just 3 words or perhaps 3 terms for you that will definitely stand out in the near future as we're talking about financial well-being, as we're talking about mental health, the financial constraints that are in the workplace and that exist in the workplace. Perhaps 3 terms, be it innovation, be it resilience, be it agility, that we need to look forward to, and we need to prepare ourselves as employees, as organizations, large or small, in how we engage with our workforce. Dr. Fundi, I'm going to start with you and then hand over the digital mic to John.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Well, my closing remarks, the issue of mental health is not new. It did not come with COVID, but what COVID has done is to expose a problem that has not been properly managed in the country. We spend less than 5% of our budgets, as a country on mental health. Certainly, even workplaces, very few workplaces have got robust employee assistance programs for psychosocial counseling. So that's one. I think employers must seriously consider having employee wellness programs in place. Number 2, at an individual level, employees are not coping, and employees need to be helped on how to build their own resilience with all the stress, the uncertainty, the anxiety that this pandemic has brought in. So things like yoga, things like mindfulness are tools that they can have. Stress management, regular exercise, those are tools that are within their control to be able to use to deal with the external stresses that are coming. Focusing on what you can control and leave that is outside of your scope of control. Those things will really help employees to deal better with their mental health challenges. And lastly, for employers, let's walk the talk. Put up those programs, create an enabling, transparent environment that ensures that people get timely support from, and are able to leverage the support that you've already made available. Thank you.
Absolutely. Prioritizing such programs and walking the talk. John, as we've heard, Old Mutual is walking the talk, but what are some of your closing remarks to how we could better construct and better implement such programs?
Yeah, I want to say that the days of prioritizing profits over people are over, unfortunately. So employers need to be human-centered and recognize that you're dealing with employees. These are human beings with financial needs, with physical needs, and all other needs that we know of as social beings. Secondly, that financial well-being is not a luxury. it is definitely a need which no employer can avoid or can survive without having one. And lastly, I think it's important to not only embark or endorse a financial well-being program, but you need to be thorough enough to actually put milestones to say, what are the metrics? What are the things we want to achieve? We want to reduce levels of indebtedness of our employees. And this could be things like the number of garnish orders that you are seeing on your payroll. This could be even absenteeism, trying to actually track whether there's any improvement in terms of attendance at work with this sort of interventions. And then generally looking at the psychosocial element of the employee and the extent to which your financial well-being program is talking to some of these things. If you have a partner that is able to assist you in pulling together the metrics and robustly measure this and celebrate the quick wins as you achieve those milestones, that will be something that will motivate even executives in any organization to remain true to their commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What is clear is that financial well-being is not a luxury. And of course, this human-centeredness brings much more healthy profit as well, so that we can make these data-driven decisions which are going to impact the well-being of our employees and employers in the workplace. A huge thank you to my panelist, Dr. Fundile Nyati, the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions, and John Manyike, the Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual Limited, for this incredibly robust conversation on how we can put in the measures and put in the pandemic-proof design and systems to ensure that there aren't these financial constraints in the workplace. But if there are, these are some of the practical tips and tricks and practices that, of course, you can take to your organization and to your business. Well, we now are going to announce competition winners from the On The Money hashtag, the On The Money competition that we have been running, who are our winners for the 500 Rand gift voucher from Take A Lot. Our 5 winners in no order is Luetu Madi, Barinda Falyun, Alvina Reuters, Tsehofatso Mamfie, and Tian van Staden. A huge congratulations to our 5 winners. You all are receiving a 500 Rand Take A Lot voucher courtesy of Old Mutual. The On The Money team will get in touch with the winners, so be sure to have a look for that email in your inbox. We now move to the second megatrend sponsored by Umgeni Water at the Future of HR Summit, this time shining a light on leadership. Our panel discussion is themed Creating Sustainable Cultures of Change, and we take the opportunity to glean actionable insights on effective leadership strategies for change. How do we get employees to effectively participate in organizational change and have equity in owning the process, which will impact how they work, as well as their contribution to the bottom line? How can managers execute valuable strategies of change while threading to the risk factor with organizational development and a cultural transformation? Do you change the culture or the structure? Mental health has also been quite a topical conversation in organizational change. Where does it fit in changing an unhealthy work environment and a non-productive one? Are millennials and the Generation Z truly the path to creating these sustainable cultures of change? Big questions and more that we'll be unpacking over the next hour, garnering actionable insights on effective leadership from thought leaders who are well versed in implementing these transformational changes. I am Violetu Dubese, your moderator for this discussion, as we engage on the topic themed Creating Sustainable Cultures of Change. With that, allow me to introduce my panelists. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Lester Goldman, the CEO of the Water Institute of Southern Africa,
We're also joined by Rashmili Lachman, Group Executive for Corporate Services at the Water Research Commission. The Executive of Corporate Services at Umgeni Water, Dr. Sipho Manana, joins us as well. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join me today in what I hope will be a robust conversation. As we open up this conversation and invite your opening remarks, I'm reminded of a video that I watched in preparation for this discussion by author Simon Sinek. And one of his talks about how to start a cultural transformation in your organization. He illustrates that by just communicating the values or the newly adopted culture and these values, it's essentially a hope and faith-based strategy, right? And he remarks that millennials and the Generation Z truly are the path to creating these sustainable cultures of change. And what they do is that they also create the demand for change for the entire organization. I'm curious to get your thoughts and opening remarks on this assessment. Dr. Sipho, let me start with you, and then I'll lend the digital mic to Rashmili and Lester.
Thank you for the question. I definitely agree that the Gen Z and millennials are sometimes paving the way through in organizations on getting the sustainable cultures there. We do experience that at Umgeni Water through the young professionals, and those young minds are able to challenge the organization in terms of what are we putting in place to make sure that their demands, or not their demands per se, but their needs are catered for. They form on their own innovation task teams that will look at how to improve on the way the organization is working with its products and services. And they also put on our toes, on its toes, the human resource function, because they are the ones who have started the peer learning groups within Umgeni Water, so that they are able to work on their own to develop the culture of learning. And also they are running brown bag lunch sessions. They are also looking at webinars on their own, but in a way they are pulling the older generation into the conversations of sustaining the culture within Umgeni Water, that is that of innovation and looking forward to creating value for the customers.
Absolutely. And Rashmili, do you find that the same pattern is reflected at the Water Research Commission, where you have these young minds which are invigorating this innovation and this cultural transformation?
Yes, we do see that come through in at the Water Research Commission. But if you think about the last year, we were thrown into rapid change. I mean, all your change management theories literally went out the window, because people that were used to being taken through change management now had to adapt really, really quickly. And we saw where the differences came in, especially with the adoption of technology. We found that the younger employees adapted really well to the change, and we had to help I wouldn't say older, but the more mature, the one that's not technically savvy. We had to help them through the process. So yes, there is that happening, but it's really important that as an institution, we always manage the balance, because the institutional knowledge that comes with people that have been here for a long time is just as much as valuable as the knowledge and energy that the new employees or the younger employees bring in. So it's for us at the WRC, it's really important in trying to manage that balance so that we get the best out of each employee.
Absolutely. And in getting the best out of the employee, Lester, do you find that you have to kind of tread lightly in terms of how you have these young minds, but also how you transfer the entrepreneurial or the young-mindedness of, to Rashmili's points, the much more mature employees to execute this change?
Yes, we are certainly. Like Dr. Sipho and Rashmili have indicated, I use our empowerment division called Young Water Professionals as an example. just a dynamic group of young people, constantly pushing the boundaries, constantly taking us as an organization, to new levels. And, that is what is required. If I think of, what we've gone through in this pandemic over the last 18 months, change is important for any organization, because without change, businesses would lose their competitive edge. They will fail to meet their strategies, and certainly may lose relevance. So it's important that we have the millennials, the Gen Zs, who can keep us relevant, who can provide, that much needed feedback, not only as an important component and reflection of our markets or our clients, but I think also as, a means of influencing the future, and they certainly are the future. So yeah, it's certainly essential that we provide even more platforms for them.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you highlight this return on investment, that change and the influence in the future, and even externally that can be affected through this. And we definitely are going to circle back to this question. Rashmili, I want to bring you back into this conversation, and what I'm excited about in your contribution to this conversation is your significant skills and experience in really straddling the fine line between what has traditionally worked and what will work in the future. To Lester's point, you've successfully integrated these fragmented units in the business, from IT to legal and compliance facilities to the corporate social responsibilities, to mention a few, into this cohesive world of work. At the Commission, what are some of the bigger mistakes in your experience that companies make when implementing a cultural change that sometimes immobilizes, as a result, employees to not want to have this equity or to own and participate in the company's change?
Okay. So one of the biggest mistakes that I've experienced and I've seen happen is that when you implement change management, or you're bringing in organizational development initiatives, you are doing it as more of a tick box, meaning that when you're actually implementing what you're doing, you're not keeping your finger on the pulse of the institution and what's happening at that point in time. And I think that's really important, because if you look at, for example, culture and bringing in change initiatives, an institution goes through various cultures throughout the year, throughout its cycle. At some point, certain cultures become more dominant, and at certain times it becomes a bit more submissive, depending on the time of the year. So when we bring in change management, it is really important that we ensure that what we're doing at that point in time is actually relevant to what the business is actually experiencing. So just for example, that say when we went through the third wave of COVID, and everyone was experiencing the personal anxieties that came with it, the losses that they were experiencing in terms of losing people that were close to them, and just, the anxiety of getting into your car and going to the shop. The stress that has been put on an employee, especially during that time, you could see it coming through. And if you, for example, decides to run a change management or an OD initiative that talks to performance management, it's the wrong time. And you shouldn't be, you should be really aware of what's going on in the institution when you implement that. And the biggest way that we manage to get integration is that, for example, if we bring in automation and digitization, which is the priority right now for most institutions, have the team being led by someone that does OD is something that we do, and we're doing that a bit differently. For example, for the automation that we are doing now, the OD manager is part of that team. That's where we're ensuring that the change management is integrated into that project. And as the project rolls out, employees are taken through change management, apart from this being told, this is our new IT platforms and this is how you need to use it. So it was really important that you get that integration. And it's also really important that you actually know, or you have your finger on the pulse of the institution in terms of the way employees are feeling, and what they're experiencing at the time, so that you get that buy-in and commitment as you go through the process. Thanks, Boyce.
Absolutely, and I see Lester nodding quite vigorously to that response. Dr. Sipho, I want to bring you into this conversation as well, because to Rashmini's point around particularly digitization and technology and the role that it has played, whenever we're talking about change management, and I think what has been prominent, especially at times of COVID, and how particularly the public sector has adapted technology and digitization and collaboration and multi-stakeholder engagement has been quite prominent. You are no stranger to implementing such strategies, and particularly in the public sector. Do these sentiments also reflect as well? Because quite a few departments and organizations within the public sector also had to adapt. Was this true as well for Umgeni Water?
We realized that a change manager alone may not crack it. As a result, all the divisions were then made to send an ambassador to the change management team so that we can get also the feedback from what is actually affecting the organization. You then need to tailor-make your change management program to what is actually happening. We experienced a lot of mental health issues within the first few weeks of the pandemic and right up to the end of 2020. As a result, our programs were then have to be led by the peer educators who start from wellness and help the employees who are struggling, and those who are reporting. Management would not be able to get exactly what are the issues, but we were helped by getting a feedback mechanism to the EXCO level to be able to respond to those issues that are happening. And then, but more importantly, is to pick up once the leaders of the organization pick up the issues and they are convinced that a change management program should be featuring these areas, you then linearly link them up so that eventually you'll be not having a culture shock to people by changing their work flows without them knowing exactly what is the issue at this point in time. A good example is the resources. We were caught up, the pandemic, and it caused us not to have the laptops for those people who work remotely. And if you are a water utility, you have got systems that you can't take home. So we had to counsel people that your situation requires you to come to work, but they were scared because there needs to be insurance, or you need to make sure that the facilities are the best, to make sure that they are ventilated properly, they are not going to be exposed to COVID when they are in an open plan. So there are many transactions within the change management process that you need to go through as an organization. But the public sector as a whole, in general, is maybe getting a problem where you have got silos. If the departments are not working together, you will not be able to implement a change management program as easily as when you have realized that the first thing to do in the change management program is to identify the silos and have a mindset that I will work across the corridor here. I won't sit in my department and say I've ticked my box, I've done this as IT, I've done this as HR, I've done this as operations. You have to get a multi-stakeholder group that will look at how each of them are being served.
Absolutely, and I think as you're talking about the type of leader, because I think this is where this conversation is going, in that the empathy that needed to be adopted, as you were mentioning about the culture shock the culture shock, rather, and the absorption that needed to take place. It needed to be in an environment with leaders who were empathetic to the situation, to the pandemic that happened, but also to your point around this rapid change that happened and the adaptation that needed to happen before we even bring in, systems and technology and talk about digitization. And Lester, I think this is where you come in, where you talk about, explicitly about this passion for effectiveness and efficiency in business administration, and for smaller businesses, perhaps it might be manageable to really look at how we can navigate this conversation on human-centeredness in our approach to lead and to design these sort of structures and changes. But when we get to a large NPC like the Water Institute of Southern Africa and working in galvanizing an entire region and water sector, what becomes then critical about how you approach and how you unlock the potential within teams and within individuals, not only at Visa, but also the member organizations of the company who have their own ideas and engagements of how to approach this situation?
Yes, thanks for your. I think my way of, responding would maybe be to, from an empathy perspective, understand the challenges that a number of our members and a number of employees within the water sector, but also our communities, what they've been facing, and that will include challenges around job security and employment status, as most businesses have been negatively affected by the pandemic. Things like working hours at the workplace and working from home. And like Dr. Sipho said, not everyone had the resources or the technology to do that. We also need to look at quality of working life, including national and, workplace level employment relations, workplace culture, leadership. There's the reconciliation of work and family as certainly what we've experienced this pandemic is tremendous tragedy and grief, and its impact not only on employees but also on the employer. Challenges like professional work practices, which traditionally have been characterized by close contact. Close contact between colleagues, close contact between employer and employee. That all changed. Workplace development, workplace learning has changed and has certainly been impacted. So those are the challenges which leaders need to have been empathetic to. And then added with that is that disruption, like the lockdown regulations, which certainly have challenged all of us. Although challenging, leaders should also see it as an opportunity to transform the organization through, for example, progressive leadership strategies. And some of the things that come to mind there would be, that they should have established a very clear vision for the organization during this pandemic. They should have been leveraging the change management timeline, in other words, before pandemic, understand what was taking place, communicate and understand what needed to take place during the change, this pandemic period, and then also, what will happen post-pandemic. Examples that come to mind would be, workplace policies, working hours, work from home strategies, and so forth. Will this be subject to change post-pandemic? Whilst we were all on hard lockdown, it was almost forced on us that there would be work from home arrangements. But we find, and that is especially true at Visa as well, that as the lockdown levels change, we've returned slowly but surely to an office environment, and we find that some staff actually prefer that, as working from home may not have been as conducive to some as to others. Certainly as leaders, we need to ask, did we support our employees? Both from a resource perspective, but also from a mental and a personal perspective. Was there effective two-way communication during the lockdown, both in work away from home and working from home environment? And then a personal passion of mine is focus on skills development, because that's a lot of what WISA, focuses on. How have leaders focused on skills development or training for their staff? Because a lot of budgets may quite justifiably, have been redirected to PPE as an example. But employees still had a lot of training and development needs. And I'll give you an example. Even as leaders, leaders needed training or assistance in leadership in times of disruption, in leading virtual teams as an example. Other staff members may have needed training on cybersecurity awareness. Suddenly everyone is online and everything is happening online. Also just adopting and adapting to the new normal work or virtual work culture. Wellness and wellness sessions. Most of us have been impacted one way or another by the pandemic. So wellness sessions and items like health, tragedy, grief, depression management, and so forth certainly comes to mind. And then, also just the opportunity could have been given to look at organizational policy refreshing and taking some of the staff through that from a virtual perspective. So I think that is some of the items that leadership certainly should have been looking at, and it's certainly not exclusive in any way.
Absolutely. Well, I think what you've done as well is answered before I called, because this is going to be my next question, especially looking to some of the case studies or some of the strategies that have been implemented, not only by WISA, but also going to Umgeni Water and going to the Water Research Commission. And as Lester was talking to some of these strategies, be it working from home, but also putting in wellness at the forefront of how people are working. And certainly, as we're seeing this return on investment being extrapolated, Rashmili and Dr. Sipho, as we are breaking down this role of governance in sustainable and transformative cultural and organizational change, there is this resounding theme of empathy, of human-centered design in developing these org change strategies. What training and development strategies or perhaps programs that you can share would be and perhaps has been beneficial to your particular organizations as you're going through these changes, particularly during this time of the pandemic, which does bring unique challenges and sometimes, this innovation of thinking outside of the box, be it remote work, where we are doing things differently in this world of the new work or the future workplace as it's been discussed. Dr. Sipho, let me start with you, and Rashmili, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Being employee-centered is the very, very important consideration at the executive level. We have coordinated that each division should be able to look at how their policies should change to accommodate the new working normal. Meaning that from the way ICT used to work in terms of cybersecurity and the service offering they did, they should check now how they need to move. Similarly, the other operations as well, But at the center is to think about the employee. How well are we going to protect the employee from the things like overworking them in the name of working from remotely or virtually, and how they respect to what used to be in the office. The ethos are not eroded by this rapid need to be on the network or in connection with the organization. So at the center of it is the diversity, inclusion, and equity that our policies should subscribe to. And as corporate services, we are spearheading that project to make sure that these three notions on in every policy that you are developing, check your diversity, the inclusion and equity. And then secondary to that, look at how the organization can increase the productivity within this particular environment without losing the employee. So we are in a process of developing a set of policies that will stimulate the growth and also protect the employees. That is a very, very big and multifaceted program that we are looking at.
And Rashmini, has the journey been reflective as well at the Commission?
I think the Commission's journey has been slightly different. We've made the effort to capitalize on the opportunities that came through from remote working. So one of the strategies of the institution has been for a long time was actually start building the infrastructure for remote working. We were ready, and in fact, nobody believed me when I said that we can do remote working until COVID happened. And I think maybe I was accused of bringing COVID just to prove my point that we were ready for it. So like all employees had laptops, they had allowances for data, etc. So how we capitalize it, especially on learning and development. If you notice very quickly, a lot of the learning institutions, including universities, started putting programs online virtually. Within the first 6 months, you could see a lot of these training courses coming online. And at the same time, what we did was we procured LinkedIn Learning as well. So with LinkedIn Learning, you got close to 6,000 courses sitting on that, and we created learning paths that's specific to individuals, specific to specific posts. And because of LinkedIn Learning works in a totally virtual environment, it sort of kept the learning alive. And what we did is, as much as we could, is to increase the collaboration within the teams. We have like virtual coffees or virtual lunches or sundowners where everyone comes together, and so we're trying to keep the social system working, and that helps a lot with the mental well-being of employees. We brought in an employee wellness service provider who is available 24/7 to any employee that has any issues coming up. In fact, it was just open not just to the employee, it was open up to their families as well, to help people deal with, or we had professional people that could deal with any of the anxieties that are coming through the system. So, and the WRC also adopted this sort of hybrid model. So if you couldn't manage working from home, the office was still available, because we became an essential services provider, so our offices did not close at any point in time. So for those that were battling, yes, the office was there, but for those who could work remotely, it was possible. And what we did see is that some employees who were battling before we went into remote working started to do really well. The time at home, or the flexibility, helped a lot of single parents as well at the same time. And some of the comments coming through is that the quality of life changed for a lot of people with the flexibility of being at home. I think especially for single parents, it made a big difference. So I think in terms of the WRC, we used the opportunities that was available to ensure that our reach was much stronger, including our impact, and not just to internal staff, as well as the water sector. With the virtual dialogues and workshops that we had, we have been able to attract a lot more people in those engagements, and our reach has gone much stronger and much further compared to previously. Because now in terms of workshops, we have international delegates that are participating, which wasn't an option in the past. So yes, it had some of the negative impacts, but we saw the opportunities that we could use as we went through all the different changes that has happened in our environments. Thanks for you.
And I think as you were talking, about the futurist in you, that we definitely got to see reflected. Lester was nodding quite vehemently, I think, as you were talking to these strategies, and I think being proactive, right? And I think that also kind of speaks to the kind of leadership which I really want to delve into, especially Lester, earlier on you were talking about, the kind of leader that would essentially emerge in these times of disruption. And I want to swing the pendulum back to you for, this touch point on leadership is definitely critical when we're talking about cultural and effectiveness, when we're talking about value introduction or value addition that you want to add to the workplace. The end result for leadership is the trust that's being created between the stakeholders. It's looking at customer centricity, right? It's looking at the innovation that now emerges because you have created this environment that would enable and create, this out-of-the-box thinking, and these young minds can be innovative, and you want this functional collaboration that essentially exists to be this return on investment. What do those in leadership need to do in order to streamline and to empower their teams, and not only their teams but themselves as well, to really have a smoother process of this organizational change?
Yes, I think Reshmili touched on it much earlier. In my view, there's really not much more important than having employee buy-in and participation in organizational change and in organizational performance. Lack of employee involvement in either change management process or organizational performance can cause major setbacks to any organization. And change is a common occurrence for every organization, but the way change is implemented can take many different forms. And if poorly managed, change can often result in costly mistakes and a negative ROI. Employee buy-in and participation is critical to ensure that change and performance, in any organization is successful. And organizational change can be adapted in many ways, and adapted and adopted in many ways in the strategy, in the operations, in technology, and in behavior. And it's my view that regardless of the size or the type of organization, dealing with the perceptions of those involved really is the difference between success and failure. And perceptions to many people are realities. Along the way, we must also expect resistance to change and planning. And I think that's the importance of a well-planned change management program. Leaders, board members, executives, need to understand this change management, not just program, but process as well. And allow for objections, understanding the most common reasons people object to change gives, in fact, an opportunity to plan a change strategy, to address some of these factors. And I believe when you invite employees to actively participate in the change process, it increases the likelihood that employees will accept the changes. By openly requesting feedback, you are demonstrating that you value employee input and want to include them in everything, and especially in the change management process. The hard truth is that traditionally, or in the past, is that most change management initiatives were done to employees, not necessarily implemented with or by them. And executives were sometimes pushing behavior change from the top and expecting it to cascade through the entire organization. That way, an informal culture almost begins to develop and rear its ugly head. The thing is, with the pandemic, we need to understand that it was done to all of us and affects all of us. Captains of industries, executives, staff, and their families. So it is done to everyone, not something done by management, as an example. But as simple as explaining that and communicating it effectively, obtaining buy-in in that regard is crucial to most organizations now.
Absolutely. And I think what is constant throughout this conversation has been the theme of monitoring and evaluation, has been the theme of creating this feedback loop, because at the end of the day, you need that meal ticket, right? That monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning in order to create those decisions and to even predict, how markets can become, so that, like Rashmili's point, you are able to be proactive in the kinds of strategies that will benefit the demographics and the different inclusive I think points that you want to engage in your workplace, because diversity, inclusion, and equity definitely plays a role in the execution of change management. And I think also the one thing that is constant in change management is the change that constantly happens. But as we get ready to wrap up this conversation, and as I invite your closing remarks, we each have about 2 minutes to be able to wrap up this conversation. So I am going to ask you to be tight and kind with your closing remarks. And I want you to start with the sentence that creating sustainable cultures of change requires. That is the sentence that you are going to complete. And as we round up this discussion, Dr. Sipho, let me start with you. I see you smiling, I see you nodding, and I think you're ready to take on this last statement. But what does it take to create sustainable cultures of change?
It requires commitment from the leaders to walk in front, and also not to lose the team. It requires to constantly check what are their feelings, what are their needs, and how best you can be able to satisfy them. But more importantly, the solutions lie among them. So it's a matter of opening a feedback loop with the leaders who are leading from the front. I will make an example. Since the start of COVID, we activated our CMT, that is a crisis management team led by the chief executive. All the time we take decisions, we see how they get implemented and how are the waterworks or wastewater works dealing with it, the corporate side versus the business side, and see whether we are able to make an impact on that. So that is what is needed, because we must walk the journey together. When we reach the stage of vaccination, we were mindful of the fact that we must walk in the front to indicate how to deal with these issues of not going to vaccinate or going to vaccinate, and be open and give everybody the respect and the democracy that is needed in the workplace. So at the moment, I would say make sure that you are with your team and be mindful all corners and check whether you are relevant with regards to this particular change that is happening. But otherwise, in the other changes, we are much more looking at the 4IR as the organization. So we know that there are various facets. We are maybe a team that is very lucky that we do have EXCO members. We are led by a 40-something-year-old, and me and another colleague of mine. We are the only 2 ExCom members who are beyond 50. The rest are the youngsters, so we get to benefit from the youth, and we are hopeful that that will be sustained because you have young people, and the culture you create and the oomph we have will be sustainable in that regard.
Absolutely, and to keep that oomph, to your point, you need that commitment and keeping your finger on the pulse, your ear to the ground, so that you can walk that walk. Rishmeli, creating sustainable cultures of change requires.
So that requires that if you're a leader, irrespective of which position you hold, it's really important that you create the psychological safety that comes in that environment, so that you get employees who feel free to express what they need, express what they're feeling and what they're going through, and feel safe in doing so. And I think it's really important that as a leader, you need to be authentic in what you are doing, in what you are trying to communicate. I think being your integrity and getting your vision and the words that you speak, have that aligned, so that when you are committed to a goal, people see the authentic side of you come through. They feel safe, and they will walk that journey with you. And I think that's really important, to create that psychological safety for your employees. Thanks for you.
Thank you so very much. The psychological safety net that needs to be created, and of course, that being led by an authentic leader. Lester, how do we create sustainable cultures of change, and what do they require?
So we need sustainable cultures to be able to create effective, efficient, and empathetic organizations. If not, the effects would be, number one, of course, sales and revenue, in whatever organization we are, whether it's private, non-profit, or public, will certainly be affected. And that will have impact on not only the organization, but employees and communities as well. Secondly, if we don't do that, we would face a lack of enthusiasm by employees. And if employees are not happy, or things being run, they will look at other opportunities and and start looking or change other changes that are required. So for me, everyone should embrace change in an organization. If not, and certainly businesses that do not adapt to a change environment tend to slow down and ultimately die or shut down. In the public sector, it will lead to community uprisings, with or without political impact, as we have seen. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. Embrace the change, because I think what has been quite pivotal here is that the change is constant, and it can only be done, and these kinds of decisions can only be done through the systems of monitoring and evaluation that is being implemented. Whether you are young or whether you are young at heart and young at mind, these are the kinds of transformative mindsets that are needed in order to implement and to execute and to plan these strategies of sustainable and transformative cultures of change. A huge thank you to my panelist, Lester Goldman, the CEO at the Water Institute of Southern Africa, Rishmeli Lachman, the Group Executive for Corporate Services at the Water Research Commission, and Dr. Sipho Manana, the Executive of Corporate Services at Umgeni Water, for this invigorating panel discussion on creating sustainable cultures of change.
A brilliant and invigorating discussion on creating sustainable cultures of change. And as you heard, it will take commitment, seeds of incremental change, and the boldness of thinking ahead as we begin the process of transformation in change management. It is hashtag FOHR and hashtag future of HR, as well as hashtag HR heroes across our social media platforms. And we love to hear from you. I'm going to read 2 tweets from you as you are engaging with us across Twitter, more specifically. I've got one from @Sir_M_Charles, and he says, a few hours into the session, into the program, but I have acquired some much knowledge. And then a response to our previous panel discussion that we have with Old Mutual, I have Malum_Grand saying, getting financial classes at an early age would play a pivotal role in terms of growing a generation that is mindful of how to use money and respects it, and also go as far as investing it in the right sectors. Definitely so. And I love that we're hearing from not only the mature audience, as one would love to imagine, but also young people, which really perfectly ties into Mega Trend 3, which is a critical one that addresses not only the consequence of socioeconomic issues and leadership, but the hope that we have not only for Southern Africa, but the African continent, which is almost 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, making Africa, of course, the world's youngest continent. We're dealing with youth and skills development in our next panel discussion, addressing youth unemployment in South Africa, looking at innovative job creation and solutions.
I have been unemployed for 2 years and 8 months now, since completing a Bachelor's of Arts in Development Studies degree at the University of Venda. I feel like unemployment in our country is a pandemic on its own, and it is very depressing. There is no hope for a better tomorrow. Those who have had jobs previously are now being retrenched in huge numbers. This is an excerpt from a report by Health E News on youth unemployment in South Africa, sharing the story of 29-year-old Matome Charles Rasegala, who, not being able to find a job, has left him depressed, with no hope of finding unemployment despite holding a bachelor's degree, a computer diploma, a driver's license, as well as a security certificate. These are the stories behind the new data revealing that 7.8 million South Africans were out of a job in the second quarter of 2021, the highest rate since 2008, according to Statistics South Africa. The unemployment rate now stands at a record high of 34.4%, one of the highest levels in the world. At the back of this bleak story painted by the data, we want to take the opportunity in this conversation to address youth unemployment in South Africa with a laser focus on innovative job creation, systems and solutions that are transformative, and what that means for industry and the economy in peeling the solutions that are ripe for the season. I am Violeta Debese, your moderator for this conversation, and an absolute pleasure it is to be joined by a panel of experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and who have been working very intimately across various stakeholders and industries across the country to address the issue that brings us to the table today. Ladies and gentlemen, joining me today is Thato Maditla, the Human Resources Director at the Youth Employment Services South Africa. We're also joined by Alexandria Proctor, the co-founder and CEO, as well as the head of product for Digs Connect. And rounding off our panel today is Philippa Geard, the CEO of Recruit Graduate. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Now, the context of this conversation is quite critical, as it goes beyond the numbers to not only the millions of stories like Matome's, but the triggers to the ebb and flow of the market that comes when events like the COVID-19 pandemic happened, to the recent government local elections, as well as the recent launch of the second phase of the presidential employment stimulus. As we open up this conversation. Tato, I'm going to kick off with you as Utunyiwe. With the SA Youth being supported by the presidency, yes, the National Youth Development Agency, as well as Harambee as part of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. The aspiration of getting to 1 million jobs for youth in South Africa through YES. Journey us through that target as well as the interventions that organizations are taking to get there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vio. So you touched on a very critical point around the journey of our youth in South Africa. So the reality is that a lot of our youth go into university and they get their qualifications, excitingly so, but they can't find opportunity in the marketplace. So at Youth Employment Service, we are an NPO that is business driven and business initiated out of a call by the president to actually solve the youth unemployment crisis in South Africa. A lot of what we do is really to try and create the first opportunity for that young, talented individual that wouldn't ordinarily have actually been given an opportunity to make something for themselves. So we do this through various ways, and a lot of it is really to partner with organizations, small businesses, large organizations, to basically create jobs for the youth across the country, and we do it through placements through organizations, or we actually place the youth through our implementation partners, which are all over the country. The aim really is to try and give a youth a 12-month exposure program for them to actually gain the skills that could actually elevate them in terms of gaining permanent employment and in essence participate in the economy of South Africa. It has been quite a huge challenge. You mentioned the 1 million job target that we had set for ourselves in collaboration with government and the presidency. And while it hasn't been an easy journey, a lot of it has actually come with quite a lot of successes in terms of creating, thus far, with no state funding, 67,000 jobs for the youth in South Africa. And the aim is to actually improve and build on that, obviously with collaboration from the different sectors and businesses within the country.
Absolutely, and I think a big theme of this, I think in getting to the 67,000 and getting these students, these young people to become active participants in the economy is the call to partnerships. And I think, maybe it being something that should be enforced, right, for lack of a better term, in order to really create these sustainable and innovative measures when we're looking to job creation. As we're staying along the theme of partnerships, Alexandra, I want to bring you in to this conversation with Digs Connect, which is the largest student accommodation marketplace on the African continent. And I want to say this because you pair registered students and young professionals who are looking for a place to stay with owners across South Africa. Now, understanding the socioeconomic challenges faced by students in South Africa who come from lower income backgrounds, some without bursaries or opportunities, housing, as we've seen, particularly at the start of the university period, it can become a challenge. Painting a picture for me, I think, when it comes to the market and the effect that it has on students prior to COVID and during COVID. And I think also just illustrating how partnerships that you've created, such as with the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, has become a catalyst in your model and the impact that you employ. And I think I'm very curious if there are any interactions between the students and the young professionals, or is it a relationship solely based on housing?
That's a big question. I was sort of writing notes as you went there, so I hope I don't miss anything, because there's a lot to kind of pull apart there. I think you started kind of talking around the challenges that financial needs students are facing when it comes to housing with higher education, and it's huge. I mean, I spend my life thinking about this and solving this, and working with different partners from the academic sector to the property sector, trying to figure this out. I mean, this is what DigsConnect's doing, and it's honestly, it's messy. It's messy. I think you look at it because
big solve, right?
It's huge. I mean, I think there's just also so much expectation here. We put so much pressure on this idea that, you know, the youth is the future of this country, it's the next generation, and like we have to get it right. You know, especially with our employment statistics, we have to get it right. We have to make sure that these students that, you know, are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds are getting this opportunity to go to university, but also, like, importantly, complete the university studies. I mean, dropout rates are huge, and one of the biggest reasons students are dropping out is because they're not staying in environments that are academically conducive. You know, they can actually study where they feel safe, where they feel like this is a place where they can get, you know, the holistic support that you need. Being a student is tough. And you take these other extra, you know, factors into account, it gets even harder. You look at South Africa's got 2.3 million students, and of that, 800,000 are funded by NSFAS, you know, your National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which means they fall into the financial category. But of course, and above that, you have your missing middle, which are students that are just as financially needy, but just can't get NSFAS funding. So now they're reliant on, you know, going to find bursaries or, you know, private sector bursaries or gap funding from universities, you know, facing the same struggles there. And just because it's such a big number of students and such a big system, the complexities are just huge. And I feel like the government hasn't embraced technology and utilized as well as they could. I mean, looking at the journey of a student who has to now apply to university. Let's say the student comes from, like, I'm from the Eastern Cape. From the Eastern Cape, you have to go online, get access to the internet somehow, you know, apply to university, and then after that, then go to NSFAS, apply to NSFAS, then wait to hear back, you know, then write your trick exams, and then it's January now. You still don't know what's happening. University's starting in, you know, let's say 30 days. You have to wait and see what happens. But hopefully, nothing's gone missing along the way. You get your numbers. Now you finally got it. Now university's starting in 2 days. Now you find accommodation and pay for your accommodation and get the leasing. It is honestly, it's really, really difficult for students. And on top of that now, so you're starting with the back foot and now trying to go straight into, you know, university is really hard. First year is a huge adjustment from school. I mean, you cover your entire matric syllabus, you know, in the first month, basically, of varsity, you have to kind of keep going. And there's dropout rates, and this is a whole new world you're in, you're out of home. So it is a really scary time. And that's why Digs Connect is, you know, so much more than just a platform. It's understanding this critical stage of the journey for students is so important. If we want to break these poverty cycles in South Africa and really get students through that, like making sure we have this holistic support from, you know, where you're staying to your teachers on campus is so important. I mean, I feel like I've spoken a lot already. I can't even get into everything else, but we did actually release a report on this. Digs released a report called The State of Student Housing 2020 last year. It's on our website. The International Finance Corporation actually took notes from our reports and released their own reports on that. So that's also online. And we are working with different partners. So you mentioned the Dell Foundation, which are incredible partners. They've been doing amazing work in South Africa, running programs across universities. They also offer a lot of bursaries. So we work with them to make sure their students are housed, and also across the broader sector. And a lot of other partnerships I feel like I can't really get into now because I'm running out of time. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to do good here. There really is. I think we just need to get the right people in the room and really leverage what technology can do in the space.
Absolutely. Well, I want to stick with you for, I know you feel like you've spoken a lot, but I'm loving the information that you're bringing through. But one thing that you've highlighted very early on in your response was the idea around community and how much that plays a role into students, and especially because there's so much in the process, and sometimes information gets lost, and money sometimes gets lost in the whole process. How important is community and perhaps support that Digs Connect emphasizes for students?
So this is more the softer side of it. You know, there's the hard lines of, you know, building this and the financials and, you know, the models. But the softer side is the human experience, you know, like what's going through someone's mind when they arrive on campus the first time? What's the psychology of it? You know, what makes someone decide to stick it out and push through the hard times? And what we believe it is a huge part of that is a community. Often, you know, if you go to a new town, you uprooted from the community you used to, and you place a new one, and you have to make new friends. And I mean, when I moved to Cape Town, maybe it's just Cape Town, it's very, you know, I really struggled at first to kind of really find my group, where I belonged, who my people were. And it's tough, you know, if you didn't have those friends, you can call and be like, hey, you know, it's been a tough couple of days, or I'm struggling with this assignment, or oh my gosh, I feel so completely overwhelmed by everything right now. Like, where do I turn to? And having the community. And I think that, I mean, Digs Connect is really built on this idea of it's social living, you know, it's the idea of like social housing, that you know, in a house you're sharing with 3 or 4 or 5 other students, you're in a building with other students, you can connect, you can have those, like, you know, intangible moments where you're making coffee together at 2 o'clock in the morning, cramming for the exam the next day, and the sense of camaraderie, the sense of, you know, we're all in together. I think it does make the journey a lot easier, but it's so hard to quantify these things. You know, when you sit across the boardroom table with, you know, big executives trying to talk about how to make students succeed, talking about these like the softer aspects of what it takes to be happy, you know, as a student. And I think that happiness is what makes students kind of push through. So it is a challenge, but I think we just need to have people, you know, throwing out innovative, out-the-box thinking here, and that just being embraced.
Absolutely. And Philippa, I'm glad you mentioned innovative and out-of-the-box thinking. And I think as we're peeling the layers of this marketplace of unemployment, for lack of a better term, Philippa, let's bring you into this conversation, because when we're talking about recruiter graduate, there's something that you talk about being smart recruitment. What exactly does smart recruitment mean? And for who is this for?
Thanks, Frio. So let me just give you a little bit of context for Recruiter Graduate, which is that I have two companies. I have Recruit My Mom and I have Recruiter Graduate. Recruit My Mom was started because I really believed that women with children were marginalized in the recruitment market and needed a space where they could unapologetically be mothers and find work that was either in office or remote, but that there's a level of flexibility to it. And in 2019, I was listening to a speech by President Ramaphosa about the plight of the youth, and I was deeply moved by what was going on. And I wanted to be part of the solution. And as a small medium enterprise, I wanted to go out and hire an intern. And I found the process really difficult. I was, you know, it was just, as a business owner, it was quite arduous to go and find this person. And so I decided to white label Recruit My Mom into Recruiter Graduate and become part of the solution to the graduate unemployment problem. And the smart recruiting is about how we have created this platform, which, like Recruit My Mom, where you unequivocally are unapologetic about being a mother, you're unapologetic about the fact that you're a graduate, be it from college or university, saying, I'm a new entrant into the market. I don't have a lot of experience behind my name, but I'm looking for an opportunity. And then what we do is we bring our professional recruiting skills to bear, and we are able to use technology as an enabler, and then our personal professional skills to be able to bring the best of those graduates to an employer. And so the whole recruiting process for an employer, for an intern or for a graduate is just so much less time consuming, and they are able to then, you know, really be able to choose from the best of the best. And that's what we do.
Thank you so much for that, Philippa. And I think as we're talking to, I think, bridging this conversation, or rather creating this bridge between the students as well as the employer, and we're talking about skills, right? I want to stick with you for a brief moment and also bring Thando into this question. And that is of critical skills versus critical roles, which can become a game changer in how students can employment, or they can employ opportunities like internships. Philippa, from this lens, how can organizations improve or rather innovate their recruitment process and make it smoother for graduates to approach them, or rather to lift that veil of intimidation, which I'm sure you're privy to in having these conversations with these graduates. And for you, Thando, in the same breath, you know, through the programs and the platforms that are offered by Yes4Youth, how are you preparing them? And is there this common language or bridge in this connection between the organization's critical role and the prospective employees or the opportunity that they have with this critical skills that they should be providing? Philippa, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, the conversation around critical skills is vitally important, because when we're talking about critical skills, we're not just talking about the here and now. And in South Africa, we've got a here and now problem, but we've also got a future problem. And I think that one needs to consider both. Is how do we immediately affect the current youth unemployment problem, but then there's a longer macro discussion that needs to be had in terms of how does one affect it long term. And we know that the critical skills that are really needed right now are all related to the fourth industrial revolution, and I mean something like the health sector. You know, we're going to have a nursing crisis in South Africa if we don't sort out the nursing issue in South Africa. And there's certain skills that that are needed, but there's a combination of what do we do now and in the future. So I think from a future point of view, there's a macro discussion around education and a big education part, which companies can play a large role in, but so does government. So starting from ECD through to prep, to high, to tertiary, what does that look like in terms of a long-term skills analysis of what the country, not just our country, but other countries are going to need? You know, we're going to have, in Africa, we're going to have more youth available for an aging population in the Western world that we can export incredible skills to in the future. So it is important to look at what we need, but it's also to look at what the rest of the world needs. But then in the here and now, we know that there's a critical skills shortage. So employers, what we do with employers is we talk about aptitude and attitude and how one can find these youths, and that's where us providing this service, a human intervention service, is to find youth that have the aptitude and attitude and ability to be able to adopt a lifelong learning process of bringing on these critical skills. And I think it is this collaboration, and employers are needing to make a mind shift of the fact that perhaps these skills aren't available immediately, but I can play a role in ensuring that it can be built into somebody even if they don't have them right now. So it's very much a journey, yeah.
And for you, Thato, in the same breath, through the programs and the platforms that are offered by Yes for Youth, how are you preparing them? And is there, you know, this common language or bridge in this connection between the organization's critical role as well as the prospective employees' critical skills?
Thank you so much for that, Vio. And I think for me, I resonate a lot with what Philippa spoke about. And a lot of it is around providing an opportunity for a youth that has aptitude and attitude, because that truly does make a difference. So for Yes, a lot of what we have founded our philosophies and processes and systems on is around providing quality work experience. So what this means is that we actually monitor and evaluate ourselves in terms of the quality of the experience that we're providing the youth in terms of the 12-month-long program that they're on. And we do this through ensuring that there is upskilling and reskilling for the youth that placed at a client. And what will happen is that we'll give every youth that registers with us that gets placed, we'll give them a cell phone, and with the cell phone will come an app. And in the app is basically an e-learning platform that provides all these types of critical skills that are important for them to actually succeed in their program. And not only is it critical that the training happens and that they are upskilled for the jobs that they've been placed into, we then close the loop by ensuring that there is a feedback loop from the team leaders that are supervising them. And those team leaders in essence provide ongoing feedback through surveys around whether there is impact in terms of the training interventions. So very important that there is a narrative shift within organizations that not everybody that is talented has to have a qualification or has to have 5 years or 10 years work experience. Some of the best people and talented people that you're going to meet are people that wouldn't have ordinarily have had access. So this can be somebody that comes from a village in Eastern Cape, a village in Harangua, in Limpopo. So if we do not change our mindsets around what talent actually is and the perceptions around that, we could potentially actually miss out on untapped talent. And we see that people that are experienced, that are senior, are very expensive. So why not groom your own talent? Why not use organizations such as Yes, such as the one that Philippa is running to create these opportunities for these talented individuals? Because you never know if your next Einstein could potentially come from somebody that really just needed just a chance. They needed somebody that could actually bet on them.
Absolutely. And I think that the missing point, right, is really that opportunity. An opportunity can come through Yes, can come through Rent a Graduate. And I think it's so important that we highlight these opportunities. And what I appreciate also about your response is this feedback loop that we keep talking about, because these processes need to be put in place and we need to measure you know, how far from the 1 million that you are, but also to your point around the definition of talent and how broad it is, and the fact that it doesn't just need to be just cornered into the private sector or just you know, these big organizations, but SMEs as well, that have an opportunity to play a role and have a big contribution to our GDP. Alexandria, I cannot wrap up this discussion without the mention and offering my congratulations on your recent presidential appointment as part of the new 7-member board for the National Youth Development Agency. So my congratulations to you in that. The president also stated that they see the NYDA as a vital partner in the implementation of the Presidential Youth Empowerment Intervention, as well as ensuring that young people are prioritized as part of the presidential employment stimulus. What are some of the critical matters that you hope to commit to and enforce that students, graduates, and the unemployed are facing as a result of COVID, but also how we can assist them? And I know that you're a staunch advocate for entrepreneurship, and particularly technology and tech entrepreneurship. So perhaps they could form part of the list?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, it's so much I want to say here, so trying notes so I don't miss anything. First of all, thank you so much. It was quite a tough process, and I was shocked. I remember when I got the phone call, I couldn't believe it. So I'm very excited about that. The appointment officially starts on the 1st of December. So until then, still trying to get to grips with everything. Obviously, a lot to catch up on. Getting a lot of correspondence. It's got a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about the NYDA. And I think it's because, you know, the youth situation in South Africa isn't where we want it to be right now. And as, you know, the national body for, you know, the agency that's supposed to, you know, promote youth issues, it kind of falls on our shoulders to get this right. So I know from 1st of December, we're picking up a big load and we've got a lot of expectations that we really have to get it right. And I mean, there's so much more to dive into that. The first thing I want to say was just, you know, talking about everyone that suffered because of COVID. And I think COVID, I mean, obviously it goes without saying, it draws a line in history. There's the before COVID time, and then there was the dreadful time of during COVID. Now we're kind of going to the post-COVID time. And I think that, you know, I think we can't look back and be like, oh, when we get back to normal. I think there is no back to normal. I think it's a new world that we've got into. I think things have changed, you know, absolutely. And one of the changes, you know, is this very rapid adoption of technology. I think that things that would have taken 10 years happened almost overnight, you know, like everyone had to go digital very quickly. And there was this very fast adoption. And even though COVID was terrible in so many ways, continues to wreak havoc on people's lives and health and livelihoods, I think that this massive rapid adoption of technology showing that we actually can, when there's enough like impetus and there's enough force and there's enough like you know, the environment is right for it, like the adoption of technology can happen really fast. And we can solve a lot of problems really quickly. I mean, how do we get the entire world to mostly carry on working, you know, kids to carry on going to school, students to carry on learning, like in a completely different environment through a pandemic, you know, still carry on getting degrees, churning out graduates despite this, because we use technology, you know, like Zoom and Teams, which we're on right now. The fact that even a few years ago, we probably had this panel, you know, sitting in person, we have to fly around the country and, you know, make it work. But now we can sit here, you know, in our offices and have this call right now. I mean, hopefully I don't spend the rest of my future on Zoom because I do miss personal interactions, and a day of Zoom meetings is not what I imagined for my life. But we can, you know, when the will is there, we can use technology to drive these initiatives. And so that's why I think also going into this, I think that, I mean, I've said before in my previous answer, I'm going to say it again, because I really want to push this heavily as much as I can. I think, you know, often as a board role, it's more kind of corporate governance. You know, you're doing auditing, you're doing corporate governance. It's not very glamorous stuff. So I don't know how much scope I'll have to push, like, you know, projects. The one thing I really want to do is just like the massive and widespread adoption of technology. We talk about all the time, but let's use in the government, you know, and I really want to partner with, spoke about partnerships earlier, partner with entrepreneurs and startups. You know, I'm part of the Cape tech ecosystem here, and there's such cool stuff coming out. Like, they're the most incredible people that are so innovative. You know, these scrappy young entrepreneurs that are building they're building technology around us that is like blowing my mind. And I think let's work with this, you know, like I think as public sector needs to work with these startup entrepreneurs, these technologists that are building the solutions and still trying to reinvent the wheel and, you know, do it for 10 times the price, 100 times the price, work with entrepreneurs on the ground that are figuring it out, you know, on a shoestring, and then by this collaboration, by this partnership, bring about solutions like that. So I definitely take as much as I can of my startup, scrappy, tech-first approach into governments, and I think it's going to be almost like the collision of two worlds there. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Definitely. So exciting times, sounds that are quite ahead. And perhaps, Philippa, as you recruiting moms, you're recruiting graduates, perhaps the third organizations could be recruit an entrepreneur. And as we take the time, I'm going to take this opportunity to wrap up in closing, but not before I get your closing remarks. And I think putting this question, you know, as Alexandria was talking about the absorption of this innovation and these out-of-the-box thinking kind of solutions, they need to be created and they need to be stimulated in an environment that enables them to do so. And my last question as we bow out, and I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes to try and answer this question. But if you were putting a policy proposal in front of the relevant stakeholders, what are perhaps 3 challenges or 3 solutions that you would put to the table and put to the stakeholders? And Philippa, I'm going to swing the pendulum back to you as we get your response to this question as well as your closing remarks. Could recruited entrepreneurship be one of those?
Oh, I do love that. But I think that within our 110,000 database of moms and nearly 70,000 graduates, that possibly there's a couple of good entrepreneurs in there for you. I actually think that entrepreneurial skills are very important. Even in the context of working for somebody. So companies like Alexandria's, I'm sure, you know, they employ people who are strong in entrepreneurship, even though they're not running their own companies. So I think that mindset is essential. So yes, possibly, I think it's a great idea. But to get to your big question, you know, if I could have 2 minutes to be able to speak to policymakers in South Africa, what would I say? I have quite a lot of things I would want to say, but the first one I want to talk to is the cost of data in this country. You know, Alexandria is right, is that technology is an enormous enabler in this country, but it is also one of the biggest divides between the haves and the have-nots. And we see on the applications where we have with graduates, is the cost of data just to fill in your CV online or upload your CV, or to have a Zoom call when you've got to have an interview. You know, that it's just, the cost of data has got to come down. So Alexandria, if you guys do anything, please, that's got to be important, you know, that's got to be right up there, because once you enable people to be able to participate in an economy technologically, it opens up so many doors for them. So that would be my one big thing. The second one is got to be around load shedding. Business confidence is absolutely hit at the moment. So we are engaging all the time with businesses, thousands of them. And we can see an immediate trend up and down of business confidence. And just being able to keep the lights on consistently will give businesses confidence to be able to start employing. You can't expect businesses to employ and invest in talent when their confidence is very low in the economy and in the nation's ability to run this economy and to grow this economy. So that would be I'm not picking any small rocks here, these are big rocks. And then the other one would be that you actually incentivize businesses to employ the youth beyond what is currently happening. So it's not just about employing the 100 and the 200 or the 50. It's about employing one. youth. And if you can get even the smallest micro enterprise to employ one youth and give them a meaningful experience, you have made a difference. And I do think that the incentives that are being put to companies need to be looked at. I think tax incentives is an easy one to do, and it goes across the board, and it can touch from micro to very big organizations. So those, I'm only going to choose 3 because I'm sure the others have got others. I have a list of probably about 7, but those would be my 3 is sort out the data costs, sort out the electricity situation in this country, and then incentivize companies to employ the youth.
Absolutely. And perhaps with next year's conversation, which we can unpack the other 4. I'm very hopeful, Philippa. Thando, the very same question to you.
Awesome. So Philippa mentioned giving incentives to organizations or businesses. So as yes, we actually do have an incentive for job creation for the youth. So we do give a triple BEE level up to 2 levels if an organization does want to actually make a difference. So just a note for everybody that is wanting to drive impact while also benefiting the organization, yes, is definitely an option in that regard. So for you, I think for me, I've really just thought about 3 elements that I think could actually drive impact. The first one, which is quite critical, I'm sure which will resonate with a lot of HR professionals, is career coaching at high school level. As an HR professional, I've worked in organizations where people are just unhappy with the chosen career fields, with the qualifications that they've studied. And when I've thought about it, it boils down to not empowering our citizens to know what their natural strengths are, what their natural talents are. And I think coaching can really be a driving force in actually accelerating and changing a lot of how people get into deciding what they're wanting to do for their careers. So I think that's the first thing, incorporating career coaching in high school modules and subjects and so forth, and empowering really our youth to basically make self-informed decisions which are aligned to what their highest potential is. And the second one is driving, so for government to basically focus a little bit more around partnerships. So what we saw is that not one organization has to solve all the world's issues, right? So there's quite a lot of value in bringing a couple of stakeholders that are like-minded, that have the same vision and passion, to basically say, how do we, in essence, maybe build more hubs or business incubation centers, as an example, or how many hubs do we actually have in the country, and how do we leverage off of those? So I think very critical that we almost all come together and collaborate in terms of solving for the challenge as a collective, and not have a silos way of solving this really big challenge that we faced with, which is with unemployment. And then the last one is really Alexandra with the NYDA. I know these are potentially discussions that you'll probably be looped into around actually with your pathway management network, right? So a lot of the conversations that we as YES have also pleaded to the NYDA is, how do we give preferential sort of treatment or benefits to youth who are wanting to actually fund their own businesses? So it's really about removing barriers for a young person that wants to start up their own business, which obviously with the right skills, with the right level of thinking in terms of a business plan, capacitating them in terms of that, but really not making it difficult for them to access capital. So I think those would be the quick wins in terms of what could really work from a short-term point of view.
Absolutely. Quick wins for some short-term solutions that we're peeling. Alexandria?
First, I want to say, just how blown away I'm excited by the responses we've got. It's been amazing. I think both, just the panelists, the quality of content has been absolutely incredible. I've actually been taking notes, and you can be rest assured at our first board meeting, I'm going to bring you all these points up. There's some really good ideas, and I'll pretend that I came up with all of them because they're excellent. There's some really, really good points there. I think I'm just so excited thinking about the passion we have in this country. And it's just, there's so many bad news stories about South Africa, but there actually are so many incredible people working so hard to make it work. And this has proved it to me again. But my 3 things basically I wrote down there is, well, first what everyone said was brilliant. The one thing I had there is just, is making South Africa more attractive for foreign investments. So that means things like, clean audits. I mean, it's very basic. Like, you have to have clean audits. You can't have a bucket with a hole at the bottom. Like property rights being inviolate, that has to be absolutely sacred. You're not going to come build a business if it could be pulled out from your feet any second. So I think those are big things, really inspiring foreign investment like that. I love the idea of partnerships also linked to electricity. So I think really working with like public-private partnerships, really just opening the doors there, being like, we don't have to solve problems ourselves. There are people who are specialized in these things. Let's work together and get us across the line. And often you'll find that when you open up to market forces, you get a really good result, and just let people's ingenuity work there. So there's two there. And the third thing I'd say is making employers' lives easier, like incentivizing employers to want to employ, because right now it's not really set up like that. Like you kind of are disincentivized to employ, to employ, I guess is the word. So really just changing that a bit. So I mean, we spoke about tax incentives. I think that's a really good idea. And just making it a bit more like friendly, really providing more incentives there, I would say. So those are my 3 points.
Absolutely. Well, at this point, I'd like to thank the opportunity to thank my guest, Thato Madikla, the Human Resources Director at the Youth Employment Services South Africa, Alexandria Proctor, the co-founder, CEO, and head of product for Digs Connect, and Philippa Geard, the CEO of Recruit a Graduate, and possibly next year Recruit an Entrepreneur, for this brilliant conversation. It is indeed no silver bullet, a big conversation, big questions that are being asked, and of course some of the solutions which have been brought forth to the table. We look forward to your engagement. This has been a live broadcast at the HR Future Summit.
If there's definitely one thing that I took from that discussion, it's that we fundamentally have to be able to have these critical discussions, but also rethink how we think, to design, to how we redistribute, where we invest our skills, and how we mine them for the future. Truly a fruitful engagement for the future of HR and that of Africa. Youth, technology, human-centered design, compensation, communication, culture are some